Get your hands off me. I paid for this seat and I am not moving. Ethan Carter's voice cracked across business class like a whip, and the flight attendant froze with her hand still gripping his arm. 200 people turned to stare. A billionaire in a charcoal suit leaned back and smiled. Know your place, nobody. You're holding up people who actually matter. What that billionaire didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the tired man in the frayed jacket had spent 11 years with his hands inside the guts of aircraft exactly like this one. And in 7 minutes, he'd be the only human being on board who could see the thing that was about to drop every soul on that plane into the black Atlantic. They called him Nobody. By the end of this flight, they'd be calling him the reason they were still alive. Before we start, tell me the city you're watching from down in the comments so I can see how far this story travels tonight. And if you believe a man's worth was never in his clothes, subscribe and stay till the end. Because what happens in that courtroom tomorrow, you will not see it coming. The gate agent's smile died the second she looked up from the boarding pass. Business class, she said. Yes, ma'am. Her eyes did the thing Ethan had felt 1,000 times in his life. They started at the frayed cuff of his gray jacket, moved down to the jeans washed pale as bone, stopped on the scuffed work boots and the small canvas backpack. No roller bag, no leather, nothing that said, "This man belongs up front." 3A, she said slowly, like she was reading it twice to be sure it wasn't a mistake. Enjoy your flight, Mr. Carter. He walked down the jet bridge with his heart pounding, not because of her look. He'd let those slide off him a long time ago. His heart was pounding because of the number he couldn't stop seeing. 7:05 a.m., London. Family court. Tomorrow. 9 hours in the air. Then a train. Then the most important room he'd ever walk into. His daughter was on the other side of it. Lily, 7 years old. Gap in her front teeth. Laugh like a wind chime in a summer window. He'd sold his truck to buy this ticket. Business class, not because he wanted it, but because it was the only seat left on the only flight that landed in time. He'd stood at the airport kiosk and stared at the price until his eyes burned thumb, hovering over confirm. Then he thought of Lily's face and pressed it and felt the money leave him like blood out of a wound. He found 3A, dropped the backpack, sank into the wide leather seat. Almost there, baby girl. Daddy's coming. It was the last quiet second he'd get. The man in 3C arrived in a cloud of cologne and contempt. Silk tie. Watch worth more than Ethan made in a year. He didn't sit down so much as take possession of the seat. Excuse me. He snapped his fingers at a passing attendant without looking at her. Is there a coat closet? I'm not hanging this in a bin next to... He glanced sideways at Ethan's boots, whatever that is. The young attendant nearly tripped over himself. Of course, Mr. Vance, right away. Ethan said nothing. He'd learned that too. You don't feed it. He turned to the window and started running the words in his head, the ones he'd written 100 times on the backs of receipts. Your Honor, I can't give her what her mother can, but I've never missed a school play, never missed a doctor's appointment. I show up. That's the one thing I know how to do. You're in my armrest, Vance said. Ethan pulled his elbow back an inch. Sorry. Vance was already gone, thumbing his phone. Then the whole cabin changed. Ethan felt it before he understood it, a hush rolling from the front of the plane toward the back like a wave. Attendants straightening. A supervisor materializing from nowhere, tugging his jacket smooth. A man was walking down the aisle, tall, tan, gray at the temples in the expensive way. 2 assistants behind him, 1 bodyguard beside him. Ethan didn't know the face, but he knew the effect, the way phones came up, the way the crew swung toward him like iron filings to a magnet. That, Vance breathed, and for the first time there was reverence in his voice, is Marcus Rothwell, Rothwell Holdings, 4th richest man in the country. Rothwell stopped at the front of business class, murmured something to the head purser, glanced at a boarding pass in his hand with the faint disgust of a man finding a problem beneath him. Then the purser turned and looked straight down the aisle. At row 3. At Ethan. Here it comes, Ethan thought, and something cold slid into his gut. The purser crouched in the aisle beside him. Silver hair. Name tag, Margaret. She lowered her voice to the tone people use when they've already decided you'll give them what they want. Mr. Carter, I'm so sorry to bother you. An empty smile. We've had a little seating situation. A very valued passenger joined us last minute, and it seems there was a system error with his seat. We'd love to move you to accommodate him. Move me where? We have a lovely seat for you in the main cabin. We'll make you very comfortable. Extra snacks are complimentary. No. The smile flickered. I'm sorry. No. Quiet. Steady. I paid for this seat. 3A. It's mine. I need this flight, and I need this seat. Sir, I don't think you understand. I understand fine. His hands had curled into fists on his knees. He forced them open. I paid more than I had for this ticket. I'm not trying to cause trouble. I just can't give it up. Vance chuckled beside him. Unbelievable. Down the aisle, Marcus Rothwell watched with the mild interest of a man watching an insect try to climb out of a glass. Rothwell decided to handle it himself. He came down the aisle, unhurried, a man who'd never had to rush toward anything in his life, stopped over Ethan, smiled a warm, camera-ready smile that didn't touch his eyes. Friend, let's not make this a whole thing. I'm not making anything a thing. I'm sitting in my seat. I can see that. Rothwell nodded, patient, generous, like he was doing Ethan a kindness. So here's what I'll do. I'll buy your ticket, the whole thing, and I'll add $5,000 cash for your trouble. You walk back, pocket the money, everyone's happy. How's that sound? Someone behind Ethan whispered, just take it. Are you insane? $5,000. Ethan thought about Lily's dental bill, the 2 months of back rent, the lawyer he'd paid in installments he could barely make. And then he thought about standby, about being bumped, about watching this plane push back from the gate without him and missing the one hearing that would decide whether he ever tucked his daughter in again. Because that was what Rothwell didn't understand. It was never about the money. No, thank you, Ethan said. Rothwell's smile slipped a fraction. No. No. For a long moment, the billionaire just stared. And Ethan understood he was looking at a man who did not hear that word. Not from anyone. And certainly not from this, the boots, the jacket, the backpack. You realize, Rothwell said, the warmth draining out of his voice, who you're talking to. Yeah, a man who wants my seat, and I'm a man who's not giving it to you. Vance couldn't stand it. He twisted around, and now his voice was loud enough for the rows behind them. Do you have any idea how ridiculous you look? Look at your boots. You don't belong up here. You never did. Some charity fair let you buy a seat you can't afford, and now you're holding up a plane full of people who actually matter. Know your place, nobody. Take the man's money and go sit in the back where you belong. Know your place. The words hit deeper than Ethan wanted them to. He'd heard every version. From the foreman who passed him over, from the loan officer who slid his application back across the desk without a word. From his ex-wife's parents at the wedding, he's not our kind. From the family court investigator who looked at his calloused hands and his cheap apartment and decided before she'd asked him a single question that a man like this couldn't possibly be enough for a little girl. Know your place. The old shame rose up, hot in his chest. And then he thought of the last time he held Lily at the airport, before her mother took her across the ocean. How she'd wrapped her arms around his neck and whispered, "You'll come get me, right, Daddy? You promise?" He'd promised. Ethan turned and looked Vance dead in the eye, and something in his face made the smaller man lean back. "My place," Ethan said quietly, "is on this flight, and I'm keeping it." Margaret came back with a man in a different uniform, heavier braid on the shoulders, badge that read, "Duty Manager." "Sir, gather your things and come with me. If you refuse, I call security and you're removed from this aircraft. That means you don't fly today. It means you go on a list. Is that what you want?" Ethan's heartbeat climbed into his throat. You don't fly today. The whole thing was coming apart in his hands. Pull him off this plane, and the promise died with it. He'd stand in an empty terminal watching his one chance to reach his daughter climb into the sky without him. Please. He hated how the word came out cracked small. He hadn't meant to beg. Please. You don't understand. I have to be in London tomorrow morning. It's a custody hearing. For my daughter. She's 7. If I'm not there, not my concern, sir. Flat. A man reciting policy. My concern is this flight. So do you cooperate, or do I make the call? Behind him, Rothwell sighed. Oh, for God's sake, just drag him off. And the cabin agreed. Ethan heard it, the low ripple of a dozen strangers who'd already decided he was the problem. Not one of them saw a father. They saw the boots. They saw everything except the one thing that was true. The duty manager reached for the radio on his shoulder, and in that exact second, Ethan glanced out the window. He didn't decide to. His eyes just went there the way they'd always gone to the window on a plane. 11 years of habit he'd tried and failed to shake. 11 years walking the tarmac at dawn with a flashlight and a clipboard. 11 years on a creeper beneath the belly of jets, bigger than houses, learning to read an aircraft the way other men read faces. Ethan Carter had been an aircraft maintenance technician. Hydraulics. For over a decade before the layoffs took the whole department, his entire job had been to find the small wrong thing before it became the enormous fatal one. And now, past the trailing edge of the wing at the base of the engine pylon, he saw a stain, dark, wet, spreading. A slow bloom of fluid weeping down the white metal, catching the gray airport light with a faint red sheen he'd have known in his sleep. At the bottom of the ocean, in his grave, hydraulic fluid. Ethan went cold all over. He knew that color. He knew that exact place. And he knew what it meant when you saw fluid there weeping like that before a flight. Before 9 hours over open water with no runway for 2,000 miles in any direction. A hydraulic system that failed over the Atlantic didn't fail politely. It failed all at once, and it took the flight controls down with it into the black. Stop, Ethan said. Nobody heard. The duty manager was keying his radio. Stop. He stood up so fast his knee cracked the seat back in front of him. Every head in business class snapped around. The duty manager's hand froze. Sir, sit down. There's a hydraulic leak on the number 1 engine pylon. His voice had changed completely. Gone was the man who'd been begging 30 seconds ago. This was flat fast, certain the voice of a man who'd said these exact words 100 times to people who needed to hear them. Right side of the housing aft of the pylon fairing. Fluids weeping down the metal and pooling on the leading edge. I've been staring at it for the last minute and it is getting bigger. You cannot fly this airplane. Silence. Then Vance laughed an ugly, disbelieving bark. Oh, this is rich. Now he's an aircraft engineer. Sir, the duty manager snapped, patience gone. I don't know what you think you saw. I know exactly what I saw. Ethan didn't blink. 11 years, certified hydraulic maintenance tech. This airframe runs 3 independent circuits at 5,000 psi left, center, right. What I'm looking at is a leak on the right circuit at the pylon interface. If it's weeping on the ground at rest before you've even pressurized for takeoff, you've got a compromised line. And the second you demand full pressure on rotation, that line opens up and you lose that circuit. Lose it at the wrong moment, and you lose the airplane. The words came out hard and clean and precise, and the whole cabin went dead silent. Because there was something in the way he said it. You could dismiss a man's boots. You couldn't dismiss the sound of a man who knew every word he was saying. Rothwell had had enough. This is absurd. He stepped into the aisle, jaw tight. This man is fabricating a crisis because he doesn't want to give up his seat. It's a stunt, a pathetic, desperate stunt. Are we really going to delay my flight because His lip curled. Some grease monkey claims he sees an oil stain out a window. Call his bluff. Get him off. Let's go. It's not oil, Ethan said, not even looking at him. Oil's amber and thin. This is heavier red under the light running slow. I've had both on my hands 10,000 times. I'm not confusing them. He turned to the duty manager. Sir, I'm begging you. I've got nothing to gain by lying about this. You want to throw me off this plane, fine. Throw me off. But do the inspection first. If I'm wrong, you've lost 5 minutes. If I'm right and you push back anyway. He let it hang. You've read the reports. Everyone in that uniform's read the reports. The duty manager's jaw worked. Then he keyed his radio. Ground duty manager, gate 47. I need a maintenance tech at the aircraft now. Possible hydraulic fluid on the #1 pylon housing. Hold departure. I repeat, hold departure. The cabin exhaled. Rothwell went a shade of red Ethan had never seen on a human face. You have got to be kidding me. Sit down, Mr. Rothwell. No, sir, this time. No 20 years of loyalty. Just a man who'd remembered what his actual job was. Please, take your seat. The next 9 minutes were the longest of Ethan Carter's life. He sat back down. The whole cabin was staring at him now, but the looks had changed. Nobody knew what to believe. Half of them still thought it was a stunt and hated him for the delay. The other half were craning at their own windows, trying to see what he'd seen. Vance said nothing. He'd gone very still. Through the glass, Ethan watched a maintenance truck pull up beneath the wing. Watched a tech in a high-vis vest climb out with a flashlight. Watched him walk to the pylon, look up and go rigid. Watched him reach up with a gloved hand. Touch the housing. Bring his fingers back down. Watched him look at his fingers. Then watched him grab the radio on his chest and start talking into it very, very fast, waving his free arm hard at the cockpit. Ethan closed his eyes. There it is. They found something. A woman 2 rows back watching her own window, her voice high and thin. Oh my God, the mechanic, he's calling people. There are more trucks. Look. Everyone looked. 1 truck had become 3, then 4. Men swarmed the pylon. A cherry picker rose. Someone photographed the housing. And through the open cabin door, Ethan heard the purser on the interphone with the flight deck, and then the captain's voice came over the PA. It was not the smooth voice of a man welcoming everyone aboard. It was clipped. Tight. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We've been made aware of a maintenance issue and our ground team is inspecting it now. Out of an abundance of caution, I'm returning us to the gate. Please remain seated. I apologize for the delay, but I promise you this is the right call. Ethan knew what out of an abundance of caution meant. It meant the captain had looked at what the mechanic found and gone pale. The truth reached the cabin the way truth always does on a plane. In fragments passed seat to seat, whispered and re-whispered until it arrived whole. A hydraulic line at the #1 pylon interface, a failed fitting, a degraded seal that had split. The right circuit had been leaking slow and steady, and when the mechanics ran the pressure test at the gate, the line blew out completely on the stand, spraying fluid across the tarmac in a red arc that sent 2 ground crew jumping backward. If that line had held just long enough to get them airborne, if it had let go on rotation, or an hour into the flight over the ocean at altitude, when the captain hauled back on the yoke and demanded everything that system had. Nobody finished the sentence. Nobody had to. 241 people were on that airplane. A billionaire who wanted a better seat. A stockbroker who thought a man's worth could be read off his boots. And a tired single father who only wanted to see his daughter. Ethan didn't feel like a hero. He sat in 3A with his hands shaking, and what he felt was a cold, sick horror because he understood better than anyone else on that plane exactly how close it had come. He kept seeing it, the line blowing at 41,000 feet. The controls going soft in the captain's hands. 241 people who'd never know why. And he kept thinking, if I'd taken the money, if I'd walked to the back, I wouldn't have been at that window. I'd have gone down with all of them, and Lily would have grown up thinking her daddy chose to leave. He pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes. That was when he felt someone standing over him. He looked up. It was Vance, white as paper, hands trembling. He opened his mouth twice before anything came out. You saw it, Vance whispered. Out the window. You saw it. Yeah. I told you to. His voice broke. I called you a nobody. I told you to sit in the back. If they'd taken you off if you hadn't been in this seat at this window. He couldn't finish it. "I know," Ethan said. Vance dropped hard into 3C and put his face in his hands, and Ethan realized the man was crying. This polished, sneering man in his silk tie weeping because he'd just done the same math and the answer had scared the arrogance clean out of him. "My daughter's 6, Vance whispered to no one, to everyone. "She's home. She's 6. I'd have never." Ethan looked at him a long moment. Then, because he was the kind of man he was, he reached over and put a hand on the man's shoulder. "Hey, you're gonna go home to her. That's all that matters now. You're gonna go home." At the front of the cabin, Marcus Rothwell hadn't said a word in a very long time. He sat in the seat he'd fought for and stared straight ahead at nothing, and his face was the face of a man whose entire understanding of the world had just been quietly demolished. He'd built an empire on the belief that some people mattered and some didn't. That worth was a thing you could measure in dollars and suits in the fear of flight attendants. He'd walked onto this plane certain the man in the frayed jacket was a nobody, an obstacle, a thing to be moved, and that nobody had just saved his life, that nobody had seen the one thing every wealthy important priority passenger had looked straight past. Had stood up in his ruined boots and refused to sit down, and in refusing, had reached out and dragged 241 people back from the edge of the ocean. Rothwell turned his head slowly and looked across the cabin at Ethan Carter. And for the first time in 30 years, Marcus Rothwell did not know what to say. The captain came out of the flight deck himself. Younger than Ethan expected, 50, maybe 4 gold stripes on his sleeve, a look on his face like a man who'd seen a ghost. He came down the aisle, slowly scanning the seats. The duty manager pointed. The captain stopped at row 3 and looked down. "Are you the man who spotted the leak?" The cabin held its breath. "Yes, sir." The captain was quiet a beat. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "The line let go on the test stand 10 minutes ago. Complete failure of the fitting. My chief mechanic tells me if we'd rotated with that line in the shape it was in, we'd have lost the number 1 circuit somewhere over the North Atlantic. Probably at the worst possible moment." He looked Ethan dead in the eye. "You understand what you did?" "I do." "How'd you even see it?" "My own crew walked right past it. Walk-around was signed off 40 minutes ago." "I used to do your walk-arounds," Ethan said. 11 years. Hydraulics. Got laid off 2 years back, whole department cut. Been doing warehouse work since." A small, tired shrug. "But you don't forget. You spend that long looking for the thing that kills people, you never stop looking. Even when nobody's paying you to. Even out the window of a seat somebody's trying to take." The captain absorbed that. Then in front of the whole cabin, 4 gold stripes, 30 years of flying the man, in whose hands every life on board had rested, he extended his hand to the tired single father in the frayed gray jacket. "Sir, on behalf of my crew and every soul on this airplane, thank you. You saved my flight. You saved my career. And you saved a lot of people who'll never fully understand how close they came." Ethan shook it, and the cabin, the same cabin that 20 minutes earlier had murmured for him to be dragged off in handcuffs, began one by one, then all at once to applaud. But Ethan Carter wasn't thinking about the applause. Even as it rose around him, even as strangers gripped his shoulder, even as Vance wiped his eyes, and Rothwell stared, and the captain held his hand, Ethan was thinking about the one thing that had never left his mind through all of it. The gate, the delay, the clock. They were going back to the gate. This aircraft wasn't flying anywhere tonight. A blown hydraulic line meant hours of repair, or a whole new plane, or a cancellation. And the hearing was tomorrow morning, in London. And he was still sitting on a tarmac in New York, no closer to his daughter than he'd been an hour ago. Maybe further. The horror rose in him all over again, a different horror now. I might have just saved everyone on this plane, he thought, and still lose the only thing I came here for. He looked out the window one more time at the maintenance trucks, at the red fluid still streaking the white metal, at the whole disaster he'd pulled them all back from. Then down at his hands at the calluses. 11 years of that work had left there, and he thought of a promise whispered against his neck by a 7-year-old girl. "You'll come get me, right, Daddy? You promise?" "I'm trying, baby." he whispered so quietly no one heard it over the applause. God help me, I'm trying. And somewhere over his shoulder, unheard by the cheering cabin, Marcus Rothwell unbuckled his seatbelt, stood up, and started walking toward row 3, toward the man he'd called a nobody, with an expression on his face that no one who knew him would have recognized. Marcus Rothwell stopped at the edge of row 3, and the man who'd never once in 30 years run out of words stood there with his mouth open and nothing coming out. Ethan didn't have the energy left to brace for another round. If you're here about the seat, he said quietly, the answer's still no. I'm not here about the seat. Rothwell's voice came out rough, scraped raw. You knew. You knew that line was going to fail, and I stood right there and called you a liar. I told them to drag you off this plane. His hands were shaking, a man worth billions shaking in an airplane aisle. If they'd listened to me, they didn't. But if they had... He couldn't finish it. Nobody on that plane could say the sentence out loud. I owe you my life. Everyone on this aircraft owes you their life. And I spent 20 minutes trying to have you thrown off it like garbage. Ethan looked at him, and what he saw wasn't a villain anymore. He saw a man standing in the hole where his whole understanding of the world used to be. You didn't know, Ethan said. That's not an excuse. No, it's not, but it's the truth. You looked at my clothes and decided who I was. People have done that to me my whole life. You're not the first. He shrugged, exhausted. I stopped taking it personal a long time ago. That should have made Rothwell feel better. It did the opposite. His face crumpled at the corners. How do you do that? How do you just let it go? Because I've got bigger things to carry than what you think of me. And that was the exact second the captain's voice came back over the cabin speakers, and every head in business class turned up toward the sound. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. I want to thank you for your patience, and I want to be straight with you, because you've earned it. A pause. Ethan felt his stomach drop before the man even said it. The aircraft has sustained a hydraulic failure that cannot be repaired at the gate tonight. This airplane is not going to London. A groan rolled through the cabin. Somebody near the back said, "Oh, come on. Our team is rebooking every passenger onto the next available flights. I know some of you have connections and places to be, and we will do everything humanly possible. Please gather your belongings." And once again to the gentleman who caught what the rest of us missed. The captain's voice caught just for a breath. There are 241 people going home to their families tonight because of you. Thank you, sir. The applause started again. Ethan didn't hear a note of it. Not going to London. The words hit him like a dropped engine block. He'd known it was coming. He'd known the second those trucks multiplied on the tarmac. But knowing a thing is coming and having it land on you are two different weights. He felt the whole night collapse inward. The truck he'd sold. The ticket he couldn't afford. The lawyer. The receipts. The promise. All of it funneling down to one fact: the plane that was supposed to carry him to his daughter was dead on the tarmac. It was 7:15 at night in New York. The hearing started at 7 the next morning in London. 5 time zones and an ocean away. He did the math without wanting to. He was too good at math for his own good. Even a direct flight leaving in the next hour, if one existed, if a single seat on it existed, would land him with almost nothing to spare. And there was no such flight. He'd searched every one of them 3 days ago at that kiosk before he bought the last seat in the sky. Mr. Carter. Margaret the purser was standing over him, and her whole face had changed. The empty smile was gone. What replaced it was shame. Can I help you with anything? Your bag? No, thank you. I've got it. He stood. His legs didn't feel like his. He pulled the backpack from the overhead, the whole of what he'd brought across the world. One change of clothes, a folder of documents, and a drawing Lily had made him, of the two of them, holding hands under a yellow sun, and held it against his chest, like it was the only solid thing left. Rothwell was watching him. You said you needed to be in London tomorrow morning. A hearing. For your daughter. It doesn't matter now. It clearly matters. It doesn't matter, Ethan said sharper, because if he let himself feel how much it mattered, he'd come apart right there in the aisle, because there's no way to get there. The last flight that landed in time was this one. That's why I'm on it. It's over. I just don't get to know it's over until tomorrow morning when I'm still standing in Terminal 4. He turned to go. And Rothwell caught his arm, the same arm the flight attendant had grabbed an hour ago when all of this started, except this grip wasn't ownership. It was desperation. Wait, just wait. Tell me what the hearing is. They stood in the jet bridge while the other passengers streamed past, some slowing to stare, a few reaching out to touch Ethan's shoulder. Thank you. God bless you. My kids say thank you. And Ethan barely registered any of it. He was deciding whether to tell a billionaire the most broken thing in his life. He decided the way he decided most things. Directly. Her name is Lily. She's 7. Her mother and I split 2 years ago. Rebecca met somebody with money, a guy from London, and a year ago she told me she was taking Lily to live over there with him. His jaw tightened. I fought it every way I knew how. But her lawyers cost more in an hour than I make in a week, and a temporary order let her take Lily to London while the case runs. That was 10 months ago. I've seen my daughter 4 times since. 4. Because I have to buy a plane ticket every time I want to look at her face. Rothwell was listening in a way Ethan suspected the man hadn't listened to anyone in years. Tomorrow's the final hearing. The judge decides where she lives. Permanently. Here with me or there with them. And my lawyer told me straight, the one thing that ends it is not showing up. If I'm not in that courtroom, the judge sees an empty chair where the father's supposed to be, and Rebecca's lawyer stands up and says, Your Honor, this is exactly the pattern. Unreliable. Absent. And that's it. Gift-wrapped. He looked up. That's why I couldn't give you the seat. It was never about the seat. It was about being there. For a long moment, Rothwell just stood there. Then he took out his phone. What are you doing? Ethan said. You spent your whole night saving my life. The least I can do is spend the next 10 minutes trying to save yours. He was already dialing. His voice dropped into the clipped absolute register of a man who owned things. David, it's Marcus. I don't care what time it is. I need the Gulf Stream. Where is it right now? Ethan's heart stopped. I don't care that it's in Teterboro. I care that it can be wheels up in 90 minutes with 2 passengers to London. Yes, tonight. I know the crew duty time's David. That's why I'm calling you, and not dispatch. Find me a fresh crew, or find me a solution, and I need it in 20 minutes. A pause. His eyes flicked to Ethan, and for the first time, the man almost smiled. Because I owe somebody a very large debt and I intend to pay it tonight. Call me back in 10. 10 David. He hung up. Ethan stared at him, mouth dry. You have a plane. I have a plane. A private plane. That can fly to London. That's generally what they're for. 6,000 miles of range. Empty right now except for a very tired crew that flew it in this afternoon, which is the only wrinkle. But David's very good at wrinkles. It's why I pay him. For a second, Ethan couldn't speak. He'd spent the last hour watching everything he'd worked for vanish into a hole. And now this stranger, this man he'd been ready to hate, was offering to fly him across an ocean. Why? Ethan said, cracked. Why would you do that? Rothwell looked at him, and the almost smile was gone, replaced by something raw. Because you didn't take the $5,000. I've spent 30 years believing everybody has a price. Everybody. And you sat there in your worn-out boots with your back rent and your custody battle, and I offered you enough to solve a dozen problems, and you said no. Because there was something you wouldn't sell. Your daughter. His voice thickened. You were the only person on that entire airplane who wasn't for sale. And you turned out to be the only person who could see the thing that was going to kill us all. I don't think that's a coincidence. Let me do this. Let me be for one night the kind of man you already are. The jet bridge was silent, and Ethan Carter, who hadn't cried in front of another human being since he was a boy, had to look away at the wall to keep himself together. Okay, he managed. Okay, thank you. The phone rang 8 minutes later, not 10. Rothwell answered on the first ring and listened, and Ethan watched his face and tried to read the verdict before the words came the way he'd read 100 faces across 100 maintenance bays. He couldn't read it. Rothwell's face gave away nothing. Say that again. The fresh crew. When? A pause. And customs on the London end. Good. File it. We'll be there in 40 minutes. Have the car meet us curbside. We're not walking back through this terminal. And David, thank you. I mean that. He hung up and looked at Ethan. There's a crew, a reserve captain and first officer who are on standby at Teterboro tonight. They're legal to fly. The airplane's fueling now. If we can get from this terminal to Teterboro in 40 minutes, we're wheels up by 9 and on the ground in London a little after 8 in the morning their time. The relief that started to rise in Ethan's chest died halfway up. The hearing's at 7, he said. The words dropped between them and just sat there. 7, Rothwell repeated. 7 a.m. London. My lawyer said be there by 6:30 to clear security and find the courtroom. You just said we land after 8. That's over an hour after it starts. It's finished by the time I clear the runway. For the first time all night, Marcus Rothwell looked genuinely lost. He'd pulled a jet out of the sky and a crew out of thin air and moved the immovable. And it still wasn't enough because the ocean was as wide as it was, and the clock was the one thing even his money couldn't buy back. There has to be a faster... There isn't? Ethan said it gently, because he could see what it cost the man to fail at this. It's a 7-hour flight we can't leave for 90 minutes, and there's a 5-hour time change working against us. The math doesn't bend. He put his hand on Rothwell's shoulder, the same way he'd done for Vance, comforting the billionaire for failing to save him. You did everything. More than anyone's ever done for me. It's okay, really. It's... Call your lawyer. Ethan blinked. What? Your lawyer, in London. Call her right now. Rothwell was already moving, pulling Ethan up the jet bridge by the arm, his voice sharpening. There are things you don't know because you've never had to know them, and I know them because I've been in 100 rooms full of lawyers. A hearing time is not a law of physics. Judges grant continuances. Somebody calls the court, explains there's a documented emergency. An aircraft that suffered a mechanical failure with the passenger's name on the manifest, and things bend that you don't think can bend. But somebody has to ask. And it has to be tonight before that judge walks in tomorrow with no reason on earth to wait for an empty chair. He stopped and looked Ethan dead in the eye. You've spent this whole night refusing to give up. Don't you dare start now. Call her. Ethan's hands were shaking as he pulled out his phone. It was past midnight in London. He was about to wake the only person standing between him and losing his daughter, and the odds of any of this working were close to 0. But Rothwell was right about one thing. He hadn't given up all night. He wasn't going to start in a jet bridge. Sarah Whitmore, solicitor. He pressed it. 1 ring, 2, 3, 4. Each one leaking the hope out of him until, hello, a voice thick with sleep. Who is this? Sarah, it's Ethan Carter. I'm so sorry to wake you. Ethan. A rustle. The voice snapped awake. It's midnight. What's wrong? You're supposed to be on a plane. I was. It's... He closed his eyes and said it in order, clean and fast, the way he'd log a fault. My flight had a mechanical failure. Serious. The plane's grounded. I'm still in New York. There's a chance at another flight, a private one, but the earliest I'd land is after 8 in the morning. The hearing's at 7. I'm going to miss it, and you told me if I miss it... Ethan, stop. Breathe. Her voice cut through his calm, now fully awake, shifting from friend to lawyer in a single breath. Tell me exactly one thing. Can you prove it? The mechanical failure? Is there a record? Something with your name on it. The flight number. Something official. And Ethan looked up, and standing 3 feet away was Marcus Rothwell, and behind him, coming out of the jet bridge with a tablet in her hands, and her face full of that new shame, was Margaret the purser, who had clearly heard every word. Ma'am, Margaret said, stepping forward, tears standing in her eyes. I can print it. The maintenance log. The delay report. The manifest with his name, the failure code, the captain's write-up, all of it officially stamped in 5 minutes. And I'll write a statement myself. I'll put my name on it. I'll swear to what this man did tonight in front of any judge on earth." She looked at Ethan and her voice broke. "It's the least I can do." Ethan's throat closed. "Sarah, did you hear that? I heard it." And now there was something new in his lawyer's voice, something he hadn't heard in 10 months of losing. There was fight in it. Ethan listened carefully. This changes everything. A documented mechanical emergency, sworn statements, official airline records. That is not a man who failed to show up. That is a man prevented from showing up by circumstances entirely outside his control. And every family court in this country knows the difference. Get me those documents. Get me every scrap of paper that woman can print, and get yourself on that flight. And Ethan, don't you give up on me yet. We are not done." The phone nearly slipped out of his hand. "I hear you," he whispered. Margaret was as good as her word and faster. She didn't take 5 minutes. She took 4. She came back through the jet bridge at a near run with a folder still warm from the printer, each page stamped with the airline's seal, and on top was a sheet she'd written by hand and signed, and when Ethan read the first line his vision blurred so badly he had to stop. "I have been a flight attendant for 26 years. Tonight a passenger I was ordered to remove from the aircraft saved every life on board, including mine. His name is Ethan Carter, and I was wrong about him." "I can't read the rest," Ethan said, and laughed wet and broken. "I'll fall apart." "Then don't read it. Just give it to the judge." She pressed the folder into his hands and closed his fingers around it, and then, because 26 years of composure could only hold so long, she hugged him hard, once the way you hug someone you'll never see again, but will think about the rest of your life. "Go get your daughter. Go." And then they were moving. Rothwell had a car. Of course, he had a car. A black SUV waiting at the curb the instant they cleared the doors. A driver who didn't ask a single question, just took one look at his boss's face and pulled into traffic like the road was on fire. Ethan sat in the back with the folder against his chest, and his phone lighting up over and over in his hand, and he realized dimly that word was traveling. The first text was from a number he didn't know. "This is James Vance, from the plane. Rothwell told me what's happening. My firm has an office in London if you need anything on the ground. A car, a runner to the courthouse. Anything you call me. I owe you a debt I can't pay. Let me pay a piece of it." Ethan stared at it. The stockbroker. The man who'd called him a nobody, who'd told him to know his place, who'd been weeping in seat 3C an hour ago. Before he could answer, another came. Then another. The woman 2 rows back who'd first spotted the trucks. A man who said his 3 kids were home in New Jersey, and he'd be reading them a bedtime story tomorrow because of Ethan. Somehow in the space of an hour, in the strange electric way these things move, Ethan's number had passed hand to hand through a cabin full of people who'd watched him refuse to sit down, and every one of them was reaching across the dark to push him toward London. "They're all texting me," Ethan said half to himself. "The whole plane. Of course they are." Rothwell watched the highway lights slide past. "You gave them their lives back tonight. There isn't a person on that aircraft who wouldn't move heaven and earth for you right now." He turned. "You didn't just save 241 people. You changed them. Every one of them is going home to hold somebody tighter and remember that the man who made it possible was the one they all looked down on. You have no idea what you set loose in that cabin." The SUV took the ramp toward Teterboro, and through the windshield, Ethan could see the lights of the private airfield ahead, and beyond them on the tarmac, a sleek white jet with its stairs already down, and its lights already on, and a crew moving around it in the dark. "That's her," Rothwell said. "Fueled and filed and cleared for London." He checked his watch. 8:41. "If we're wheels up by 9, we've got a fighting chance. It'll be closer than I'd like. But your lawyer's going to buy us the hours on the other end, and we are going to get you into that courtroom. Do you believe me?" And Ethan, who'd learned long ago not to believe in much, he couldn't hold in his own 2 hands, looked at the jet and the folder, and his phone still glowing with the messages of 200 strangers pulling for him across the dark, and found to his own surprise that he did. "Yeah," he said. "I believe you." The car rolled to a stop at the foot of the air stairs. A woman in a pilot's uniform came down them, fast hand already out. "Mr. Carter, Captain Reyes, I've been briefed, and I want you to know something before we take one more step." She gripped his hand hard. "I've got a daughter of my own. She's 9, and there is not a headwind over that ocean tonight strong enough to keep me from getting you to yours. Get up those stairs. We're flying you to London." Ethan climbed the air stairs 2 at a time, and Reyes was right behind him, and by the time he'd dropped into a leather seat that cost more than his car had, the first officer was reading back their clearance and the engines were spinning up. "Buckle in, gentlemen. We've got a slot, and I do not intend to lose it. Wheels up in 4 minutes." And that was when the first twist of the night hit. The first officer came out of the flight deck, young, tense, a tablet in his hand, and crouched in the aisle beside Reyes. And though he kept his voice low, Ethan had spent 11 years reading the body language of aircrew, and he knew bad news when he saw it walking down an aisle. "What?" Ethan said. "What is it?" Reyes turned around, and her face was doing the thing a professional's face does when they're deciding how much to tell a passenger. "It's nothing we can't handle," she started. "Captain." Ethan's voice was flat. "I did aircraft maintenance for 11 years. I found the leak that grounded the last plane. Don't manage me. Tell me straight." Reyes looked at him a beat longer, then nodded one professional to another. "Slot problem. There's a line of weather moving up the eastern seaboard faster than forecast. Air traffic control just tightened the departure sequence. If we don't push back in the next 6 minutes, we lose our slot, and the next available window behind this weather is 110 minutes out." She let that land. "An hour and 50 minutes. That's the delay if we miss this slot." Ethan felt the blood drain out of his face. He didn't need to do the math out loud. An hour and 50 minutes wiped out every scrap of margin. It turned after 8 into after 10, and after 10 into it's over. "Then we don't miss it," Rothwell said. "We might not have a choice, sir. Ground control gives the sequence, not me. And there are 12 aircraft ahead of us in the conga line, and I can't jump them." 6 minutes, Ethan said. His mind was already moving, already back under the belly of a jet, already solving. "The fuel. You said the airplane was still fueling when we pulled up. Is the fuel load closed out? Is the paperwork done?" Reyes blinked. "The refuel was just completing when you boarded. Why? Because if the fuel figure isn't finalized and signed, ground thinks you're still a maintenance hold and you're at the back of the sequence. But the second you close it out and call ready, you're not a hold anymore. You're an active departure, and you slot in by readiness, not by position in line." Ethan was leaning forward now, urgent. "I've watched this from the ramp 1,000 times. The airplanes ahead of you and the line half of them aren't ready. They're waiting on catering on connecting bags on a passenger who's still in the terminal. They're holding the sequence, but they can't actually go. If you call ground right now and tell them you are fully closed out, doors closed, fuel signed, ready for immediate departure, you leapfrog every airplane in that line that isn't. Because ground controllers hate a ready airplane sitting behind a not ready one. It gums up the whole flow. They'll move you up. But you have to call it now before this window closes." Reyes stared at him for one full second. Then she was up and moving toward the flight deck. "Marcus he always like this." "He's been like this since I met him 5 hours ago," Rothwell said. "It's why we're all alive." Ethan heard Reyes drop into her seat and key the radio, her voice crisp and fast. "Ground, Gulfstream, November 4-2. Charlie, we are fully closed outdoors, secured fuel, signed, ready for immediate departure, requesting to slot ahead of any aircraft not ready to taxi." A pause. The longest pause of Ethan's life. Then through the open flight deck door, the tinny voice of a ground controller, and Ethan couldn't make out the words, but he could read Reyes's shoulders, and he watched them drop half an inch in relief. "Copy, cleared to push," Reyes said. "Thank you, ground. Thank you very much." She turned in her seat and called back through the door. "Mr. Carter, you just jumped us 9 airplanes. We're pushing back now. Wheels up in 3. The jet lurched backward. And Ethan, who had just used 11 years of ramp knowledge that a layoff had told him was worthless, sat back in the leather seat and let out a breath, and Rothwell looked at him across the aisle and shook his head slowly. "They laid you off," Rothwell said quietly. "Whatever company had you doing that work, they cut you loose, called your department a cost. Told you your knowledge wasn't worth keeping. 2 years ago, Ethan said. Whole department. Yeah, that knowledge just saved 241 lives and got you 9 spots up a departure line. Rothwell's jaw was tight. Somebody made a very stupid decision letting you go. When this is over, you and I are going to have a conversation about that. But not tonight. Tonight we fly. The jet clawed into the sky over Teterboro at 9:01, and the lights of the whole city fell away beneath them, and then they were out over the black water heading east, with nothing below but the Atlantic and 7 hours of dark. Ethan let out a breath he felt like he'd been holding since the gate. You should sleep, Rothwell said. Nothing to do now but fly. You've got a long day coming. I can't sleep. I know, but you should try. He didn't try. He couldn't have if his life depended on it. Instead, he pulled out the folder and opened it on the little table, because his hands needed something to do, and his mind needed something to hold that wasn't the sound of his own heartbeat. The maintenance log. The delay report. The failure code in cold black numbers. The manifest Carter Ethan J., Seat 3A, and Margaret's statement on top that he still couldn't read past the first 3 lines. His phone buzzed. Sarah. Past 2 in the morning, her time. I'm up. Working. Don't call, save your battery, just read. Here's where we are. Emergency application drafted. Grounds documented. Mechanical failure. No reasonable alternative transport applicant en route by private aircraft. Expected arrival 0800. I'm requesting the hearing be put back to 1000. 3 hours. It's a reasonable ask. Then a second message, and Ethan's stomach tightened. But you need to know who we've drawn. District Judge Aldous Hartley. 22 years on the family bench. He is fair, but he is old school, and the one thing he cannot abide is anyone treating his courtroom as less than the most important place on earth. He once refused to wait 40 minutes for a father stuck on a broken train and gave the mother everything. I'm not telling you to frighten you. I'm telling you because we cannot put a foot wrong. If we ask perfectly. Ethan set the phone down and stared at it. Bad news? Rothwell asked. The judge. Sarah says he's fair, but he doesn't wait. For anybody. Handed a whole case to the mother once because the father was 40 minutes late on a broken train. He laughed, no humor in it at all. 40 minutes. And I'm asking him for 3 hours. Rothwell was quiet a moment. A broken train's bad luck. A broken airplane grounded by mechanical failure with a manifest and a log, and a sworn statement from the airline's own crew. That's not bad luck, that's an event. There's a paper trail a mile long. He can't wave that away the same way. He leaned forward. And here's what I've learned about men like your Judge Hartley. They don't actually care about punishing people. They care about respect. The fastest way to lose a man like that is to look like you didn't try. And the only way to win him is to show him you moved heaven and earth. You crossed an ocean overnight in a borrowed plane because being in his courtroom mattered more than sleep, than money, than anything. That's not a man who treated his court as an afterthought. He sat back. So we don't hide what happened tonight. We hand it to him, every piece. You really believe that? I've built a fortune on reading what men want. It's the one thing I've never been wrong about. A pause. Almost never. I was wrong about you at the gate. But that proves my point. The thing you wanted was so far outside anything I understood that I couldn't read it. I couldn't price it. He shook his head. Stop assuming the worst. You've got 7 hours to torture yourself, and it won't change a thing except how you walk into that room. It was good advice, and Ethan knew it, and he also knew he couldn't take it because there was a thing he hadn't told anyone yet, a thing he'd been carrying alone since the captain said the plane wasn't going to London. There's something else, Ethan said. Lily doesn't know I'm coming. Rothwell waited. She knows the hearing's tomorrow, but Rebecca controls everything on that end. The calls, the video calls, all of it. The last time I talked to Lily 3 weeks ago, Rebecca cut the call off after 4 minutes, said Lily was tired. She wasn't tired. I could see her face. His jaw tightened. I think Rebecca's been telling her things. About me. And the last time I saw my daughter's face on that screen, she looked at me like she wasn't sure I was still coming. Like somebody'd been telling her, maybe I wouldn't. The cabin was silent, except for the low roar of the engines. "That's the part I can't fix with a plane," Ethan said. "You can fly me across the ocean, but you can't fly me into my little girl's head and undo 10 months of whatever her mother's put there. Nobody can do that but me, and only if I'm standing in front of her. And I'm terrified I'm going to walk into that courtroom and she's going to look at me the way she looked at me on that screen. Like she's not sure who I am anymore." Rothwell didn't say anything for a long time. And when he finally spoke, his voice had changed. Quieter. Stripped of the command and the money. "I had a daughter," he said. Ethan looked up. Had. The word cost him visibly. Emily. She'd be 34 now. When she was 7, the age yours is, I was building the company. I was gone. Not gone the way you're gone, fighting to get to your kid across an ocean. Gone the other way. Gone because there was always a deal, always a flight, always something that mattered more in the moment than a school play. He stared at the seat back in front of him, seeing something that wasn't there. "Her mother and I divorced when Emily was 9, and I told myself I'd make it up to her when things settled down. I told myself that for 20 years. And the whole time Emily was growing up, thinking exactly what you're afraid your Lily thinks, that her father gave up, that he chose other things." "What happened?" Ethan asked quietly. "Nothing happened. That's the worst part. No tragedy, no dramatic falling out. She just stopped. Grew up, moved away, built a life I wasn't in. And one day I realized I hadn't spoken to my own daughter in 3 years, and couldn't tell you when the last conversation had been, because I didn't know at the time it was the last one." He looked at Ethan, and his eyes were wet now. This man worth billions 35,000 feet over the black Atlantic. "I sent her a message on her birthday last year. First time in 4 years. You know what she wrote back? 3 words. Thanks. Take care. That's what 20 years of choosing the deal over the daughter buys you. 3 words from your own child." Ethan didn't know what to say, so he didn't say anything. "So when I watched you at that gate, refusing to give up that seat, refusing my money, willing to be dragged off in handcuffs, rather than risk missing one hearing, I didn't understand it. It made me angry, because it was a kind of love I'd never once been willing to pay the price for, and watching you pay it so easily, without even having to think, it was like looking at the man I could have been and never was." He wiped his eyes almost angrily. "That's why the plane. Not because you saved my life. Because you're doing the one thing I was too much of a coward to do. And if I can't go back and be the father I should have been to Emily, and I can't, that door's closed, I closed it myself. Then by God I can put my plane and my money and every resource I've got behind a man who's fighting to be the father I wasn't." The 2 men sat in the humming dark, and neither said anything for a long while, because there wasn't anything to say bigger than what had already been said. Then Ethan reached across the little table and gripped the billionaire's forearm hard the way one working man grips another. "When this is over, you're going to call Emily. Not a text. A call. You're going to tell her exactly what you just told me. All of it." Rothwell shook his head. It's not too late until one of you is dead," Ethan said with a fierceness that surprised them both. "You just spent an hour telling me not to give up, not to assume the worst, to keep fighting when the math looks impossible. You want to give me that speech and not take it yourself." He tightened his grip. "That's the price. You flew me across an ocean. This is what it costs. You call Emily. Deal." For a long moment, Rothwell just stared. And then something broke open in the older man's face, something locked up tight for 2 decades, and he laughed short, wet, astonished, the laugh of a man who'd forgotten what it felt like to be told what to do by someone who cared about the answer. "You're really something," Rothwell said. "I offer you a private jet, and you counter with a demand that I fix my own life. Deal or no deal?" "Deal," Rothwell said. "God help me, deal." And that was when the second twist of the night arrived, and it arrived the way disasters do, as a single soft chime. Ethan's phone. A new message. And when he saw who it was, from every muscle in his body went rigid, because it was not from Sarah, and it was not from a grateful passenger. It was from Rebecca. He hadn't gotten a message from his ex-wife that wasn't routed through lawyers in 4 months. And now, at what was past 2 in the morning, her time. Her name sat on his screen, and his hand hovered over it, and something cold moved through him, because Rebecca did not send messages in the middle of the night. Rebecca slept the sleep of a woman who was winning. He opened it. I know you're not going to make it. My solicitor heard your side filed an emergency application from the U.S. Ethan, don't. Please don't drag this out with some desperate stunt. Just let it happen the way it was always going to happen. Lily is settled here. She has a life. You showing up at the last second exhausted in whatever state you're going to be in, it's not good for her. It confuses her. Every time you appear and disappear, you break her heart a little more. The kindest thing you could do, the one genuinely loving thing, would be to stop fighting a battle you can't win and let her have some stability. If you love her, you'll stop. Ethan read it once, then twice. And he felt the old poison work its way in the way it always did, because the cruelest thing about Rebecca had never been the lawyers or the ocean. It was that she knew exactly which words to use. If you love her, you'll stop. She'd taken the deepest thing in him, his love for his daughter, and turned it into a knife and handed it back to him, pointed at his own chest. For 1 second, one terrible second, it worked. He thought, what if she's right? What if I am just breaking her heart a little more each time? What if the loving thing really is to Ethan? Rothwell was watching his face. What is it? Who's that from? Ethan turned the phone around and let him read it. Rothwell read it, and his face went very still and then very hard. She knows about the application. Somebody told her. Her solicitor heard. Ethan's voice was hollow. She's telling me to stop, to not show up. She's saying it's the loving thing. That I confuse Lily, that I break her heart every time I appear and disappear, that if I really loved her, I'd... He couldn't finish. And the worst part is, for 1 second, I almost... Look at me! Rothwell's voice cut across him like a blade. Look at me, Ethan. You listen to what I'm about to say, because I am the world's leading expert on the thing that message is trying to make you do. He leaned all the way forward. That message is not about Lily. It has never once been about Lily. That is a woman who just found out she might lose, and she is doing the only thing left that could still make her win. She is trying to get you to quit yourself, because her lawyers can't stop you anymore, but your own guilt might. His eyes were burning. I know that message. I lived that message. Except in my case, nobody had to send it to me. I sent it to myself. 20 years of maybe it's better for Emily if I don't push. Maybe I just confuse her. Maybe the loving thing is to give her space. And you know what all that noble self-sacrifice actually was? His voice dropped to almost nothing. It was cowardice wearing a halo. It was me letting myself off the hook and calling it love. And it cost me my daughter. The cabin was silent. So here is the truth, and I need you to carve it into your bones, Rothwell said. A father who shows up and confuses a child is worth 10,000 of a father who disappears to keep things tidy. Children don't need tidy. They need to know all the way down that somebody is coming for them. That's it. That's the whole job. And the reason Rebecca sent you that message at 2 in the morning is that some part of her is terrified you're about to prove in front of a judge that you are exactly that man. So don't you dare quit. Don't you dare hand her the one weapon her lawyers couldn't buy. You put that phone down and you fly to your daughter and you let a 7-year-old decide for herself whether her father showing up breaks her heart. Because I promise you that is not what it does. Ethan looked at the message one more time, and then, very deliberately, he locked the phone and set it face down on the table. You're right, he said quietly. I know I'm right. I paid 20 years to learn it. I'm not answering that. No, you're not. You know what you answer that with. You answer it by walking into that courtroom. Rothwell sat back. That's the only reply that message deserves, you standing there. Let that be your text back. Ethan almost smiled. Almost. And somewhere under the exhaustion and the fear, something hardened in him into a thing that wouldn't bend again for the rest of the flight, because for 1 second, Rebecca had gotten inside him with the oldest trick there was, and she'd failed. And now that she'd tried it and failed, Ethan understood something he hadn't fully understood before this moment. She was scared. After 10 months of winning, Rebecca was scared. Which meant for the first time since a court order put an ocean between him and his little girl Ethan Carter had a real chance. "How long to London?" he asked. Rothwell checked his watch. 6 hours, give or take. We're barely an hour out over the water. "Then wake me at first light," Ethan said, and he closed his eyes, and for the first time in 3 days, with a borrowed jet carrying him east through the dark and a billionaire keeping watch across the aisle, and the sworn word of 241 strangers writing in the folder against his chest. Ethan Carter finally let himself sleep. He didn't sleep long. 2 hours may be less the kind of sleep that isn't rest so much as a body surrendering because it has nothing left. When he came back to himself, the cabin was dim and humming, and Rothwell was still awake across the aisle, still watching a glass of untouched water sweating on the table in front of him. And Ethan understood that the billionaire hadn't closed his eyes once. "You didn't sleep," Ethan said, his voice thick. "I don't much. Haven't for years." Rothwell's eyes were rimmed red. Turns out a man can lie awake a great many nights over 20 years without ever once admitting to himself what he's lying awake about. It's 4 in the morning here, which makes it... He did the math, 11 in the morning in London. No, it doesn't. "I'm exhausted, I can't hold the zone straight anymore." "It's 9 in the morning in London," Ethan said, and the number woke him up completely cold and fast. Because 9 in the morning in London meant the hearing had been going for 2 hours already. It meant Sarah was somewhere over there right now doing whatever she could do, and he was here 35,000 feet over the middle of the ocean, able to do exactly nothing. His phone was on the table where he'd left it. He grabbed it. 1 bar of signal, the jet's spotty connection flickering in and out over the water. 3 messages waiting. The first was from Sarah, time-stamped an hour ago. "Emergency application is formally filed with the court. Duty clerk has it. But I have to be honest with you, the clerk cannot promise it reaches Hartley before he takes the bench. He's known for arriving early and starting on time no matter what. If he walks in and calls the case and you're not there, and he hasn't seen my application yet, he can proceed. I'll be physically at the courthouse by 6 to hand it to him myself if I have to stand in the car park and wait for his car. But prepare yourself. This is not certain. It is very far from certain." Ethan read it twice, then handed the phone across to Rothwell without a word. Rothwell read it and his jaw worked. "She's going to physically ambush the judge in the parking lot with the paperwork. Good. That's good. That's the right instinct. There are 2 more." Ethan swiped. And when he read the second one, everything in him went still. It was from Sarah again, time-stamped 20 minutes later than the first. "Ethan, something's happened and I need you to stay calm. Rebecca's side got wind of our application. They've filed a response, they're opposing the adjournment. Her barrister is going to stand up in front of Hartley and argue that your absence is the exact pattern of unreliability they've been alleging all along, and that the court shouldn't reward it by waiting. They're going to use the very thing keeping you away as proof you shouldn't have her." The phone nearly slipped out of his hand. "What?" Rothwell said, reading his face. "What is it?" "They're turning it around." Ethan's voice was hollow. "Rebecca knew we'd ask for time. She had her barrister file something opposing it. They're going to stand up and tell the judge that me being stuck on a broken plane is proof. Proof I'm unreliable, that I can't be counted on, that this is exactly why Lily shouldn't be with me." He looked up and the horror was raw on his face. "My airplane broke down saving 241 lives, and they're going to make it the nail in my coffin." For a moment, Rothwell said nothing. Then slowly, something moved across the billionaire's face that Ethan had seen only once before, back at the gate, when the man had been certain, absolutely certain, that he would get his way. Except now, that certainty was pointed in a different direction. "No," Rothwell said. "No, they are not. He pulled out his phone. "What are you doing?" Ethan said. "You saved 241 people last night." Rothwell was already dialing, his voice dropping into that register of absolute command. "And every one of them has a phone, and a good number of them are lawyers, executives, people with reach, people who spent last night texting you offering anything you needed. Rebecca's barrister wants to stand up in that courtroom and argue that a broken airplane makes you unreliable. Fine. Let him. But by the time your lawyer stands up to answer, she is going to have in her hands the sworn statements of a purser, a captain, and as many of those passengers as I can wake in the next 90 minutes, everyone swearing under oath that the reason Ethan Carter is not in that courtroom is that he stayed in his seat to save their lives." His eyes came up burning. "They want to make your absence the story. We're going to make your absence the most heroic thing that Judge has ever heard. David, wake up. I need you to do something extraordinary, and I need it in the next hour." Ethan stared at him, and for the first time since he'd read Sarah's message, the terror in his chest was joined by something else. Something he'd almost forgotten the feeling of. Hope. But before he could even settle into it, the third message loaded the one that had been waiting behind the other two. The one his signal had been too weak to pull down until now. And when Ethan saw it, the hope curdled in his chest, because it was from a number he didn't recognize, and it was 3 sentences long, and it changed everything. "Mr. Carter, my name is Daniel Osei. I was in seat 14C last night. I'm a solicitor here in London, family law actually. I've been following what your lawyer filed, and I have to warn you about something nobody's told you. Call me the second you can." Ethan's hands were shaking as he dialed. It rang once. "Daniel Osei. This is Ethan Carter. You told me to call." "Thank God." The man's voice was fast-clipped, wide awake in the London morning. "Mr. Carter, I'm going to talk quickly because you don't have much time. I do family law in this country. I've stood in front of Aldous Hartley more times than I can count. And there's a thing about him your solicitor may not have flagged, because it's the kind of thing you only know if you've been burned by it. Are you listening?" "I'm listening. Hartley hates being managed." Osei said it hard. He is a proud, old-fashioned man, and the single fastest way to lose him is to make him feel that a wall of paperwork is being used to steamroll his courtroom. And right now, this morning, your side is about to walk in with a flood of witness statements. Dozens of them arriving by the minute, all singing your praises. Your solicitor thinks that's her strength, and in most courtrooms it would be. A pause. But not in Hartley's. If 200 sworn statements land on that man's bench in the middle of a hearing, there is a very real chance he doesn't see a hero. He sees a rich man's PR machine trying to overwhelm his court. He sees exactly the kind of theater he's spent 22 years despising. And he digs in. He denies the adjournment out of sheer principle to prove that his courtroom cannot be bought or bullied even by the truth. Ethan's stomach dropped straight through the floor of the aircraft, because across the aisle, at that exact moment, Marcus Rothwell was building precisely the thing Osei was warning him about. A flood, an avalanche. 241 statements aimed at a judge who might read the whole thing as an attempt to steamroll him. "Marcus," Ethan said, covering the phone, his voice tight. "Stop. Stop dialing. Put it down." Rothwell frowned. "Ethan, we don't have time to—" "Put it down. There's a passenger on the line, a London family lawyer, and he's telling me the flood of statements might sink us. Not save us. Sink us." Ethan turned back to the phone. "Daniel, if not the statements, then what? What does Hartley want to see?" "One thing." Osei's voice was certain. "Not 200. 1. If you drown him in evidence, you lose him. But if your solicitor stands up and hands him a single piece of proof, the coldest, most official document you have, the maintenance log with the failure code and the timestamp, no emotion, no heroism, just the bare fact that the aircraft was grounded and then stops and says nothing else and lets the man reach his own conclusion, that's how you win Hartley. He wants to feel like he discovered the truth, not like it was shoved down his throat. Give him the fact and get out of the way." A breath. "And the statements, the video, if there is one, Everything else you keep in reserve. You only bring the flood if Rebecca's side attacks first. If they stand up and call you unreliable, then you unleash it because then it's defense, not theater, and Hartley will allow it. But you never ever lead with it. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Ethan closed his eyes. It was the opposite of everything Rothwell was doing. It was the opposite of everything that felt right because everything in him wanted to hit back as hard as possible to bury Rebecca's cruelty under a mountain of proof that he was a good man. And it was, he understood with sudden cold clarity, exactly right. I understand, Ethan said. Daniel, thank you. I don't have words. You didn't have to do any of this. You kept me alive to argue another case, Mr. Carter, Osei said. Least I can do is make sure you don't lose yours. Send everything to your solicitor. Tell her one document, then silence flood in reserve. She'll understand. She's good, I know her by reputation. Now go. And Mr. Carter, for what it's worth, from someone who does this every day, a father who does what you did last night is exactly the father Hartley will want to give a child to. You just have to let him get there himself. The line went dead. Ethan lowered the phone and looked at Rothwell, and the billionaire was watching him with an expression caught between confusion and impatience. Talk to me, Rothwell said. Because I've got David waking up 19 people and a template statement going out to every passenger on that manifest, and you're telling me to stop, and I need to understand why before I pull the plug on the one thing I know how to do. Because you're about to win the wrong fight. Ethan leaned forward. Marcus, listen to me. Everything you're building, the flood, the avalanche, the 200 statements landing on the bench, the lawyer on that phone, just told me that in this judge's courtroom, that's not a rescue. It's a threat. Hartley spent 22 years hating exactly this. Rich men using volume to run over his court. If we drown him, he digs in and denies us out of principle just to prove nobody buys his courtroom. Rothwell went very still. And Ethan watched something cross the older man's face. The specific discomfort of a man being told that his greatest strength was in this one room, his greatest liability. So what? Rothwell said slowly. We do nothing. No, we do one thing. Ethan's voice was steady now, the plan clear in his head. One document. The maintenance log. The coldest, most boring, most official piece of paper we have. No heroism, no statements, no video. Sarah hands the judge one page that says the plane was grounded with the failure code and the timestamp, and then she says nothing and lets him figure it out for himself. And everything else, the statements, the video, all of it we hold in reserve. We only unleash the flood if Rebecca's side attacks first. If they stand up and call me unreliable, then it's not theater, it's defense, and the judge lets it in. He looked at Rothwell. It's the opposite of your instinct. It's the opposite of mine. And it's right. I know it's right. For a long moment, Rothwell said nothing. His jaw was tight, and Ethan could see the war going on behind his eyes, 30 years of a man who solved problems by overwhelming them being asked to solve this one by holding back. And then slowly the billionaire nodded. You're right, Rothwell said quietly. God help me, you're right, and I hate it, because holding back is the one thing I've never in my life been any good at. He almost laughed. That's the second time tonight you've told me the smart move is the one that goes against everything I am. First on the plane, say nothing. Keep your head down, get to London, and you stood up anyway. Now this, restraint. He shook his head. You keep teaching me the same lesson, Ethan. That the strongest move in the room is almost never the loudest one. He picked up the phone. David, change of plan. Kill the flood. Do not send the mass statements to the court. Hold every single one. Keep collecting them, but they go nowhere until I say. Send one thing to Ms. Whitmore right now, and only one, the official maintenance log with the failure code and the departure timestamp. The airline's stamped copy, nothing else attached. And keep the video ready. We may need all of it in an hour, or we may need none of it. Understood, good man. He hung up. Then he looked at Ethan, and something had shifted in his face, something that hadn't been there 5 hours ago at a departure gate. Send it to Sarah, Rothwell said. One document, then silence flood in reserve. Tell her the London family lawyer in 14C sends his regards." Ethan was already typing. The message to Sarah went out into the thin signal over the ocean. And then there was nothing to do but wait. And waiting. Ethan was discovering was the cruelest work of the whole night. He'd spent his life fixing things he could put his hands on. Give him a broken thing and he could fix it. But he couldn't put his hands on a courtroom 3,000 miles away. He couldn't fix a judge's mood, or a barrister's argument, or the timing of a clerk walking paperwork into chambers. He was, for the first time in his life, completely without leverage, strapped into a leather seat, while the single most important event of his life happened somewhere he couldn't reach. "I hate this," he said to the window, to the black nothing beyond it. "I've fixed 1,000 broken things. Give me a broken thing and I can fix it. But I can't fix this. I can't do anything. I'm just cargo. I'm just being flown toward a thing I can't control." "Welcome to fatherhood," Rothwell said softly. "That's the whole job in the end. Loving something so much it terrifies you and having almost no control over whether it turns out all right. The only part you control is whether you show up. That's it. That's the only lever you've got." He looked at Ethan. "And you, my friend, are showing up harder than any father I've ever seen. So whatever happens in that courtroom, whatever Hartley decides, you'll know you did the one thing that was yours to do. You crossed an ocean to show up." Ethan didn't answer. But he heard it, and somewhere in the exhausted, terrified core of him it helped a little. The phone buzzed. Sarah. "Got it. Got the log. And Ethan, whoever gave you that advice just saved us. I was about to lead with the whole file. I had 200 statements queued to hand up. Osai is right. I know Hartley. And if I'd dumped that on him, he'd have dug his heels in so hard we'd never have gotten him back. One document, silence flood in reserve. That's exactly the play. I'm changing everything now. Thank God for seat 14C. Ethan let out a breath he felt like he'd been holding for an hour. She was about to do it, he said. Lead with everything, the whole flood. If Osei hadn't called, if he hadn't been on that plane last night. But he was, Rothwell said. He was on that plane. Because you kept him on it. You want to know the strangest thing about what you did last night, Ethan? He leaned back. Every single person you saved is now a person who exists to help you. The purser who printed your documents, the stockbroker with the London office, the family lawyer in 14C who just kept your solicitor from losing your case. You didn't just save 241 lives. You built yourself an army, and you didn't even know you were doing it. Every one of them is a thread, and every thread leads back to a man who wouldn't give up his seat. He shook his head slowly. I've spent my whole life buying loyalty. You earned 241 people's in 9 minutes for free by nearly dying to save them. There isn't enough money in the world to buy what you have riding for you this morning. Ethan must have drifted again because the next thing he knew, there was gray light in the windows, and his neck ached, and Captain Reyes's voice was coming over the cabin speaker. Morning, gentlemen. It's 6:15 a.m. London time. We're beginning our descent into London City, and I want to give you the good news first. A pause, and Ethan came fully instantly awake. We picked up a tailwind over the Atlantic the forecast didn't call for. A strong one. I've been riding it as hard as this airplane will let me, and I've clawed back time. We're now looking at wheels down at approximately 7:40 London time. That's 20 minutes ahead of what I promised you. Ethan sat bolt upright. 7:40. 7:40. Reyes confirmed. I told you there wasn't a headwind over that ocean strong enough to keep me from getting you to your daughter. Turned out I got a tailwind instead. I'll take the help. There's a car waiting at the private terminal. Customs is expecting you. Mr. Rothwell's people arranged a fast track. If the ground goes the way it should, you could be walking into that courthouse by 8:15, 8:20. 8:15. Ethan's mind raced through it. The hearing was called for 7. If Sarah's application worked, if Hartley pushed it back, then 8:15 was fine. 8:15 was early. 8:15 was a miracle. But if the application failed, if Hartley started on time and proceeded, Then it didn't matter whether he landed at 7:40 or 7 o'clock exactly, because the courtroom was still 30 minutes drive from the runway. His phone buzzed. Sarah. And his hand shook so badly he almost couldn't open it. I'm at the courthouse. It's 6:20, standing in the car park. Been here since 5:30. Hartley's clerk just arrived and I caught him at the door and put the application and the single maintenance log directly in his hands and made him promise to walk it straight into chambers. He promised. He's a good man, I've known him years. But Ethan, I have to tell you something, and I need you to stay calm. Ethan stopped breathing. Rebecca's here, already here with her barrister, and they arrived at 6 as well. Which means somebody tipped them we'd try for an adjournment, and her barrister has filed his response opposing it. They're going to stand up and argue that your absence is exactly the pattern of unreliability they've been alleging and use the very thing keeping you away as proof you shouldn't have her. The phone nearly fell out of his hand. They knew, Ethan said. Rebecca knew we were going to ask. She's already there with her lawyer, and they've filed something opposing it. They're going to turn my broken plane into the reason I lose my daughter. Rothwell's face went hard. Then we're ready for them. That's the one attack we planned for. The moment they call you unreliable, that's when Sarah unleashes everything. The video, the statements, that's the trigger. Osei told you the flood is defense and defense is allowed. He almost smiled grim. Rebecca thinks she's springing a trap. She's about to walk straight into ours. But Ethan was already reading the next line and the next, and the fear in his chest was climbing because Sarah wasn't finished. And there's one more thing, and it's the reason I stepped out to text you instead of calling. Ethan, Lily's here. Ethan's whole body went rigid. What? Rebecca brought her. She's in a family room down the hall with a court officer. Not in the courtroom itself, but she's here in the building. I don't know why Rebecca brought her, maybe to show the court what a devoted mother she is, maybe to have her ready if the judge wanted to hear from her. But she's here, Ethan. Your daughter is 200 feet from where I'm standing. Get here by 9, not a minute past. Go. The line went quiet. Ethan lowered the phone slowly. Lily's there, he said to no one, to everyone. She's in the building. She's actually there. And that was when the third and final twist of the flight arrived, not through the phone, but through the cabin speaker in Captain Reyes's voice. And this time, there was no good news first in it. Mr. Carter? Mr. Rothwell. Her tone had changed completely, gone tight and professional. I need you both to hear this, and I need you not to panic. London City is reporting fog. It rolled in off the Thames in the last 20 minutes thicker than forecast. The airport's gone to low visibility procedures, and that means they're spacing arrivals way out, one aircraft at a time on the approach, long gaps between. We are number 6 in the holding pattern. A pause. Which means instead of landing at 7:40, we may be holding over London for anywhere from 20 to 40 minutes before we get our approach. I'm going to fight for every slot I can. But I need to be honest with you both about what the fog just did to our timeline. Ethan closed his eyes. He'd beaten the weather in New York. He'd jumped 9 planes in the departure line. He'd caught a tailwind across the whole ocean. He'd gotten a family lawyer to save his case from 3,000 miles away. He'd come so far, and now 20 miles from his daughter, 20 miles from the runway, the sky itself had closed its fist around him, and he was going to burn the last of his margin circling in a holding pattern over a city where his 7-year-old was sitting in a room waiting 200 feet from a lawyer who couldn't reach her. How much fuel? Ethan said, and his voice was flat and fast, the maintenance tech again already solving. Captain, how much holding fuel do we have? Because if we've got the fuel to hold, and you can take a priority approach, a medical or a... He stopped. Is there any status you can declare that moves us up the holding stack? Any legitimate one? There was a silence from the flight deck. And then Reyes's voice came back, and there was something careful in it. Mr. Carter, she said slowly, there is exactly one thing that moves an aircraft to the front of a low-visibility holding stack. And I would never, ever declare it falsely, and I'm not going to now. But I want you to know I heard your question. And I want you to know I'm looking very hard at our fuel state right now, and doing some math, and I am going to get you on the ground as fast as this airplane and this fog and my conscience will allow. A pause. Sit tight. Both of you. And Mr. Carter, that little girl has waited 10 months. She can wait 20 more minutes for a father who's about to come out of the clouds. Let me fly. Let me do my job the way you did yours last night. And Ethan Carter sat back in his seat 20 miles and 20 minutes and one wall of fog away from everything he loved in the world, with a borrowed jet circling above a city he couldn't see, and gripped the folder against his chest, and did the only thing left in the world that was his to do. He waited. The waiting lasted 11 minutes, and it aged Ethan a year. He watched the clock on his phone the way a man watches a wound. 6:41, 6:44, 6:48. The jet banked and banked again, tracing slow circles in the gray, and every circle was a minute he didn't have. And somewhere below him, under all that fog, was a runway he couldn't see, and a courthouse he couldn't reach, and a little girl in a blue dress sitting in a room with a stranger waiting for a father she'd been told might not come. Then Reyes's voice came over the speaker, and it was different, sharp, alive, moving. "Gentlemen, hold on." The fog just lifted enough for the tower to tighten the spacing, and 2 aircraft ahead of us diverted to Gatwick rather than wait. That bumps us from 6 to 3, and I've got the fuel to take a steeper, faster approach the second they clear me. A beat. I think we just got lucky. I think we're going in. Flight attendants. Well, there are no flight attendants, so Mr. Rothwell, make sure your friend's belt is tight, because I am not going to fly this approach gently. Ethan cinched the belt. Rothwell did the same, and Reyes was true to her word. The jet dropped out of the holding pattern and came down through the fog hard. The engines rising and falling as she worked the throttles, and Ethan felt the wheels reach for the ground and find it at 7:38 in the morning, 2 minutes ahead of even the tailwind's promise, and the moment the nose came down, he was already unbuckling. Reyes came out of the flight deck as the jet slowed. "Cars on the tarmac. Customs processes you in the vehicle. You don't stop. You don't stand in a single line. Go." And then, as Ethan moved past her toward the air stairs, she caught his hand one more time, and her eyes were bright. "I told you I'd get you to her. Now you do the rest. Go be her dad." "Thank you," Ethan said, and it wasn't enough, and they both knew it wasn't enough, and there was no time for more. He went down the stairs 2 at a time into the cold London morning. And there was the car, and there was a man in a suit already holding the door. A man Ethan hadn't known would be there at all. "Mr. Carter." The man climbed in behind him as Rothwell got in the other side. "Prentice, I run Mr. Rothwell's London office. I've been on with Ms. Whitmore for 30 minutes. I have your maintenance log delivered, the video queued, and the witness statements 19 signed and counting, all sitting in reserve exactly as you asked. Nothing sent to the court but the one document. Everything staged. Now." He checked his watch as the car pulled away hard. "It's 7:41. The hearing was called for 7. It's been running 40 minutes and I have not had an update in 12, and I want to be honest with you about what that silence might mean." The car went quiet. "It might mean it's going well," Prentice said. "Ms. Whitmore's on her feet arguing, and she can't text me because she's in front of the judge. That's the good version." He paused. "The bad version is that it's already over." Ethan's stomach dropped through the floor of the car. "We won't know until we know," Prentice said. "So there's no use torturing yourself with either. What I need from you is to be ready to walk into that courtroom the second we arrive, calm, composed, and looking every inch the reliable father you are. Because if it's still going when we get there, the way you walk through that door will matter. Judges watch everything. Can you do that?" "Yes," Ethan said. His voice didn't shake. He was surprised it didn't shake. The car raced through the London morning, and Ethan pressed the folder against his chest and prayed to a God he wasn't sure he believed in that the hearing was still going. His phone rang. Not a text. A call. Sarah. His hand shook so hard he almost couldn't answer. "Sarah, tell me. Where are you?" Her voice was low, urgent, almost a whisper. She was somewhere she couldn't talk loudly. "How far out?" 12 minutes, Prentice said. "Traffic's with us." 12 minutes, Ethan said into the phone. "Sarah, what's happening? Is it? Listen to me. I don't have long. I stepped out and I have to go back in." She was breathing fast. Hartley took the bench at 7 on the dot, called the case. I stood up immediately and presented the emergency application before Rebecca's side could say a word, and I did it your way. OC's way. I didn't dump the file. I handed him one page, the maintenance log, and I said nothing else. I just let him read it. A pause. And Ethan, it worked. I watched him read it. He read the failure code and the timestamp and the airline stamp slowly twice, and I could see him understanding it all on his own exactly the way Osei said. And I thought we had him. And then Rebecca's barrister stood up. And, Ethan said, Sarah and he was good. Her voice tightened. He said everything we were afraid he'd say, that this is the pattern, that you have a history of last-minute complications, that the court oughtn't reward chaos with delay, that the child needs stability, and stability means a mother physically present in this room right now, not a father perpetually somewhere else, held up by one dramatic circumstance after another. A breath. And then he made it worse. He turned to the maintenance log, the one document, the thing I thought was our clean, quiet win, and he held it up, and he said, Your Honor, my learned friend hands you a single page and asks you to be impressed by its restraint. But I'd ask you to notice what it really is. It is a grounded aircraft. Another failure. Another thing that went wrong around Mr. Carter at the worst possible moment. This is not evidence of reliability. It is one more entry in a very long list of reasons this man is never where he needs to be. Ethan's stomach turned to ice, because it was clever. It was horribly clever. They'd taken the very restraint that was supposed to win Hartley over and reframed it as evidence of a man who breaks things just by being near them. What did Hartley do? Ethan whispered. He didn't say anything. That's the worst part. He just looked at the log, and he looked at Rebecca's barrister, and then he looked at the empty chair where you're supposed to be sitting. And Ethan? I couldn't read him. 22 years I've known that man's face, and I could not read it. She took a breath. And then he asked me a question. He looked at me over his glasses, and he said, Ms. Whitmore, setting aside the aeroplane and the restraint and the clever paperwork, where is he? Where is the father? Because I have a mother who managed to be here and a father who once again is not. And I have given him 2 hours already. So tell me plainly, is he coming or is he not? The car was silent. Even Rothwell had gone still. What did you say? Ethan whispered. I told him the truth. I said, Your Honor, the father is in a car at this moment, having flown through the night across the Atlantic in a borrowed aircraft, having landed 20 minutes ago, and he is racing to this courtroom as fast as the traffic will allow, and he asks only that this court grant him the dignity of standing before you himself, before any decision is made. Her voice caught, and Hartley looked at me for a long moment, and then he said he'd give it until 9 o'clock. Not a minute passed. He said if the father is the man that log suggests, he'll be standing in my courtroom by 9. And if he's the man I've too often seen, he won't. Either way, I'll have my answer. Ethan looked at the clock on the car's dash. It was 7:51. 9 o'clock, he said. 9 o'clock. You have until 9. Get here. Not a minute passed. The line went dead. They made it to the courthouse at 8:19. Ethan was out of the car before it fully stopped Prentice beside him with the folder and the tablet, and they went through the doors and through security, which Prentice somehow made vanish a word to a guard, a name, a phone held up, and up a flight of stairs. Ethan's heart going so hard he could feel it in his teeth. And it was 8:26 when they came around a corner into a long corridor, and Sarah was standing there in her black robes, and the second she saw him, her whole face collapsed with relief. You're here, she breathed. Oh, thank God you're here. She grabbed his arm. Listen, we have 30 minutes. Hartley resumes at 9 sharp. I need to walk you through. But Ethan wasn't listening, because down the corridor past Sarah, there was a door standing half open, and through it he could see a small room with a few chairs and a low table with coloring books on it, and sitting in one of the chairs, swinging her legs because they didn't reach the floor, with a court officer sitting nearby, was a little girl in a blue dress with a gap in her front teeth and brown hair pulled into 2 braids. Everything stopped. "Lily," Ethan said. He didn't decide to say it. It just came out of him, torn loose from somewhere below thought. And the little girl's head came up. For one terrible, endless second, she just looked at him. And Ethan saw in that second everything he'd been afraid of on that plane over the ocean. The uncertainty in her face, the flicker of a child who'd been told things, who'd spent 10 months being slowly, carefully taught that maybe her daddy wasn't coming, that maybe he'd given up. He saw her not be sure. He saw his own daughter not be sure who he was. And then it broke. Her whole face broke open like the sun coming up, and she was out of the chair so fast it toppled behind her, and she was running down the corridor screaming, "Daddy!" at the top of her lungs, and the court officer half rose in alarm and then saw what was happening and let her go. And Ethan dropped to his knees on the hard courthouse floor and opened his arms, and his little girl slammed into him so hard it knocked him back on his heels, and he wrapped her up and held her against his chest, and felt her whole small body shaking, and heard her sobbing into his neck, the words that undid him completely, the same words she'd whispered in an airport 10 months ago. Except this time, they weren't a question anymore. "You came," she wept. "You came, you came, you came. I knew you'd come. I knew it. Mummy said maybe you couldn't, but I knew you would. I knew it, Daddy. I knew." "I'm here, baby." Ethan's voice was gone, completely ruined, and he didn't care. "I'm here. I told you I'd come get you. I promised. And your daddy doesn't break promises. Not this one. Not ever this one. You hear me? Never this one." "I hear you," she sobbed into his shoulder. "I hear you, Daddy." And Ethan Carter, who had crossed an ocean overnight, who had saved 241 lives, who had been called a nobody, and told to know his place, knelt on the floor and held his daughter, and understood that whatever the judge decided in the next hour, whatever happened when those doors opened, this was the whole thing. This was the reason for every mile. He didn't see Rebecca standing at the far end of the corridor watching. But Rothwell did. She was standing near the courtroom doors with her barrister, a tall, elegant woman in an expensive coat, and her face as she watched her daughter sob with joy in the arms of the man she'd spent 10 months painting as unreliable, was doing something complicated. Rothwell, who had spent his whole life reading faces, watched hers. And what he saw there wasn't triumph, and it wasn't anger. It was something more uncomfortable. It was a woman watching a piece of evidence she hadn't planned for her own child, screaming, "I knew you'd come," the single most powerful testimony any family court could ever hear, delivered not from a witness box, but from the heart of a 7-year-old who had never stopped believing. Her barrister leaned in and said something low and urgent. Rothwell was too far to hear it, but he could read the shape of it. "This is bad for us. Get her back in the room. This doesn't help us." And Rebecca Rothwell watched it happen. Rebecca shook her head. Just slightly. But she shook it. And she didn't call her daughter back. Rothwell filed that away. It might have meant nothing. It might have meant everything. But a mother who let that reunion keep happening, who didn't send a court officer to pull her sobbing child off the father she was trying to prove unfit. That was a mother who, somewhere underneath 10 months of lawyers and strategy and a new life in London, still had a piece of her that couldn't quite do it. He walked over to Ethan, who was still on his knees, still holding Lily, and crouched beside them. "Ethan, I hate to be the one, but it's 8:40. You've got 20 minutes, and you need to be ready when those doors open. Not for you, for her." He nodded at Lily. "You want to give this little girl the best chance of never saying goodbye to you at an airport? Again, you walk into that room as the calmest, most solid man that Judge has ever seen. Can you do that?" Ethan pulled back just far enough to look at his daughter's face, to wipe her tears with his thumb, to memorize her all over again. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, I can do that." But before he could stand, the door at the far end of the corridor opened, and a woman stepped through it, and Ethan felt Lily go rigid in his arms. It was Rebecca. She'd left her barrister by the courtroom doors and crossed the whole length of the corridor, and now she stood a few feet away, looking down at the two of them, at her daughter wrapped around the neck of the man she'd been fighting, and for a moment nobody said anything at all. "Lily," Rebecca said quietly, "Sweetheart, why don't you go with the nice officer for just a minute? I need to talk to your dad." And here it was. Ethan braced for it the moment she'd pull Lily away, the last cruelty, the mother using the child as leverage one final time. He tightened his arms around his daughter, not enough to hold her against her will, just enough to say, "I'm here." But Lily didn't want to go, and Rebecca didn't make her. "It's okay, baby," Ethan said gently, because he would not turn this little girl into a rope for two adults to pull. "Go on. Just for a minute. I'm not going anywhere. I promise. And you know what I do with promises." Lily looked at him hard, checking his face the way children check for lies, and then she nodded and let the court officer lead her a few steps down the hall, close enough that Ethan could still see her, and she never took her eyes off him, not once. Then Rebecca looked at Ethan, and Ethan stood to meet her, and he waited for the knife. It didn't come. "I sent you a message last night," Rebecca said. "On the plane, telling you to stop, to not come." "I got it. I told you it was the loving thing, that you confuse her, that you break her heart every time you appear and disappear." Her voice was strange, unsteady. "I want you to know I believed it when I wrote it. I've believed it for 10 months. I built my whole everything, the whole case on believing it, that you were the one hurting her, that I was protecting her from a father who couldn't be counted on." "Rebecca, let me finish, please, because I have to say this before we go in there, and I might not have the courage in a minute." She pressed her fingers to her mouth, gathering herself. "I just watched my daughter run down that hallway screaming that she knew you'd come, that she never once doubted it. And I stood there and I realized Ethan, my 7-year-old, has known something the whole time that I've been paying lawyers a fortune to help me not see." Her eyes filled. "You always come. You have always come. 4 times across an ocean in 10 months. I cut your phone calls short, and you called back. I told her maybe Daddy couldn't always make it. I told her that God forgive me, because I wanted her to need me more than she needed you, and she looked at me every single time like she felt sorry for me, because she knew better. She knew you'd never stop coming." Ethan couldn't speak. "The plane broke down," Rebecca said. "My solicitor found out and he was thrilled, Ethan. He actually smiled because it was going to be so easy. The unreliable father stuck again, another dramatic excuse. And I sat in that courtroom this morning and let him build it. Let him stand up and turn your broken plane into a weapon. And the whole time there was this thing in the back of my head that I kept pushing down, and it was this." Her voice broke completely. "A man who doesn't care doesn't sell his truck. A man who doesn't care doesn't cross an ocean overnight in a borrowed plane. A man who doesn't care isn't kneeling on a courthouse floor at 9 in the morning with our daughter sobbing into his neck. I've spent 10 months telling a story about who you are, and I knew the whole time it wasn't true. I just needed it to be, because if you're a good father, then what does that make me for taking her so far away from you?" "You're not a bad mother," Ethan said quietly. "Lily's happy here. She's thriving. That's you. Whatever else went wrong between us, you gave her that." Rebecca laughed, wet and broken. "You're doing it again, the thing that made me crazy when we were married. I hand you a reason to hate me, and you refuse to take it." She wiped her eyes. "I'm going in there, Ethan. And I'm not going to let my barrister finish what he started. I can't. I can't stand up and win by convincing a judge that Lily's father doesn't love her because it's a lie, and someday she'll be old enough to read the transcript, and I will not have my daughter read that her mother did that." She straightened. "I don't know what the judge will do. I don't even fully know what I'm going to say. But I'm not going to fight you anymore. Not like this. Not by making her doubt you." And Ethan Carter, who had braced his whole body for one last cruelty, looked at the mother of his child and felt something he had not expected to feel this morning, something that had nothing to do with winning. He felt sorry for her. "Then let's go in," he said. "Together. Not as whatever we've been for 10 months. As her parents. Both of us. Let's just go in there as her parents and let the judge see 2 people who both love the same little girl and got lost trying to prove it." Rebecca looked at him for a long moment. "When did you get so wise?" she said. "Somewhere over the Atlantic," Ethan said. I had a good teacher." And he glanced down the corridor at Marcus Rothwell, who was standing back watching, and who Ethan saw had turned his face away and was pressing his knuckles to his mouth, because a billionaire who'd lost his own daughter was watching two people find their way back to being parents, and it was cracking something open in him that 20 years had sealed shut. At 8:58, the courtroom doors opened and a clerk stepped out. "District Judge Hartley is ready to resume. Is the father present?" Sarah stepped forward. "He is. He's here." And from inside the courtroom, an old voice, dry and precise and without warmth, said, "Then let's have a look at him. Bring him in." Ethan went to Lily first. He crouched down to her level and took both her small hands in his. "Baby, I have to go into that room for a little while. It's grown-up stuff, and it's boring, but it's important. You're going to wait right here with the officer, and you're going to be able to see me the whole time through the window in that door. Okay, I'm not disappearing. I'm right there. And when it's done, I'm coming straight back out to you." "Promise," she whispered. "Promise. And you keep them," she said, and smiled the gap-toothed smile that had carried him across an ocean. "You always keep them." "That's right, baby, that's right." He stood and Sarah fell into step beside him, robe swishing, scanning her notes one last time, and then she stopped and looked up at him. "Ethan, one thing. When we go in, Rebecca's side still gets to respond to everything. And even if Rebecca's had a change of heart, and I don't fully trust it yet, I've been burned before her barrister is a professional, and he's going to keep pushing until she tells him to stop, and even then, he may try one more thing. He's going to look at you and tell the judge your entrance is a performance, staged, that you flew in for the dramatic effect. He'll try to poison it." She held his eyes. "I need you not to react, no matter what he says. The moment you get angry, the moment you look anything other than steady, you hand him exactly what he's fishing for. Can you hold it together, no matter what comes out of that man's mouth?" Ethan looked at her. Then he looked back at Lily standing at the family room door, watching him with her whole heart in her face. "Sarah," he said quietly, "I just crossed an ocean for that little girl. There's nothing that man can say that's going to make me lose my temper and lose her. I've been holding it together my whole life. I can hold it for 20 more minutes." And he walked towards the courtroom doors, not as the nobody they'd tried to throw off an airplane, not as a man in worn-out boots holding a folder of papers, but as a father whose daughter was watching him through a pane of glass with a billionaire on one side and two lawyers behind him, and the sworn word of 241 grateful strangers, held in reserve, walking into the most important room of his life. The doors opened, and District Judge Aldous Hartley looked up from the bench as Ethan Carter walked in at 9 o'clock exactly. And for a long moment the old man said nothing at all, just watched him cross the room, the way a man watches something he is trying to decide whether at long last to believe. "Mr. Carter," Hartley said at last, "you'll forgive me if I don't stand." "Of course, Your Honor." Ethan didn't know the customs of an English courtroom. He knew only that he was going to be respectful and honest, and that his daughter was watching him through the glass in the door. "You've cut it fine. It is 9 o'clock precisely. Another minute and I'd have had my answer without you." The old judge folded his hands. "Sit down. Ms. Whitmore, your client has arrived, which I confess I did not entirely expect. Before I permitted these 2 extra hours, Mr. Fenwick, for the mother, had begun an argument, and fairness requires I let him finish before I hear anything further. Mr. Fenwick." And Rebecca's barrister rose. Ethan sat down slowly beside Sarah, and he felt her hand press once hard against his forearm. "Steady, no matter what he says." He gave the smallest nod and made himself go still, the way he'd once gone still under the belly of a jet with a torque wrench in his hand present. Calm, unmovable, while Fenwick began to take him apart. "Your Honor," Fenwick said, his voice smooth as poured oil, "I'll acknowledge that what we've all just glimpsed in the corridor is affecting. A father arrives at the 11th hour. A child weeps. It is the stuff of films." He paused. "Which is precisely why this court must be careful." Family proceedings are not decided on the strength of a moving arrival. They are decided on patterns, on the unglamorous day-to-day question of who is actually present. And on that question, the evidence has been consistent for 10 months. My client is present. Mr. Carter is perpetually dramatically elsewhere. Ethan's jaw wanted to tighten. He didn't let it. "Consider what we're asked to celebrate," Fenwick went on. Mr. Carter missed the start of the single most important hearing of his daughter's life. He was over the Atlantic, and we're told the reason is heroic, an aircraft a fault, a rescue. But I gently observe that a man who is genuinely reliable does not require a supporting cast of strangers to explain why he's late. He is simply there. Stability is not the grand gesture. Stability is the school run. It is the packed lunch. And I put it to this court that Mr. Carter, for all his evident love, has proven again and again that he cannot be counted upon to simply be there, and that this morning is not the exception to that pattern. It is the most vivid example of it we have yet seen. He let it land. And it landed. Ethan felt the reunion in the corridor being quietly reframed in 4 oiled minutes into one more entry on a list of a man who couldn't be relied on. Fenwick turned toward his own table to sit. And that was when it happened, the first crack in the morning, that no one in the room had scripted. No. The word came from the mother's table, from Rebecca. Fenwick stopped halfway to his seat. "I'm sorry." Rebecca was on her feet. "Your Honor, I'd like to say something, directly, to the court." Fenwick's face went carefully blank, the blankness of a barrister watching his client walk toward a cliff. "Your Honor, may I have a moment with my client?" "No," Rebecca said again, and now her voice was steadier. "You may not. I've paid you a great deal of money to say things I no longer believe, and I'm not going to sit here and let you finish saying them. Your Honor, please." Hartley's eyebrows rose a fraction. He set down his pen. "Mrs. Carter, it's Ms. Hollis now, Your Honor. But yes, I'd like to speak, if I may. This is somewhat irregular." The old judge studied her for a long moment. "But this entire morning has been irregular, and I have learned in 22 years that when a parent insists on speaking against the advice of their own counsel, it is usually the truest thing I'll hear all day. Go on." Rebecca's hands were trembling on the table, and she pressed them flat to steady them. "I've been sitting here all morning," she said, "listening to Mr. Fenwick, a very good barrister, whom I'm paying a fortune, build an argument that Ethan is unreliable, that he's never there, that he can't be counted on." She stopped. "And 40 minutes ago I stood in that corridor and watched my daughter run the length of it screaming, 'I knew you'd come.' Not I hoped, not maybe. I knew." Her voice cracked. "And I realized standing there that the whole time I've been telling myself Ethan was unreliable, my 7-year-old has known better than her own mother. She never once believed he wouldn't come, because he always comes." The courtroom had gone very quiet. I have to be honest with this court because I can't win this way. Her composure was going, and she let it. "Ethan Carter is a lot of things. He's stubborn, and he's proud, and he never had the money I wanted us to have, and that is a great deal of why I left. But he is not unreliable. He has never once, not one single time in 7 years, failed to show up for that little girl when it counted. I moved her 4,000 miles away, and he followed across an ocean 4 times on money he didn't have. I cut his phone calls short, and he kept calling. And She pressed her fingers to her mouth. "I told her, Your Honor. I told my own daughter that maybe Daddy couldn't always come, because I wanted her to need me more. I planted doubt in a child about a father who has never given her a single reason to doubt him. And she saw through it every time because she is smarter and better than I have been through this whole thing." Fenwick had sat down. He was not looking at his client. He was looking at the table. "I don't know what kind of mother that makes me," Rebecca said. "I told myself it was about stability, a better life than the one we had with him. But I watched her run down that hallway this morning, and I understood I've been trying to fix something in my daughter that was never broken. Her love for her father was never the problem. My resentment of him was." She looked for the first time all morning directly at Ethan. "I'm sorry. I don't want to win like this. I don't want her growing up someday and finding the transcript of this hearing and reading that her mother stood in a courtroom and tried to convince a judge her father didn't care. Because he cares more than anyone I have ever known. He just never owned a suit nice enough for anyone to notice." She sat down. And Ethan, holding everything in, keeping the promise he'd made to Sarah in the corridor, did the hardest thing he did all morning. He said nothing. He let it be hers. Judge Hartley was quiet for a long time. He took off his reading glasses. He set them on the bench. He looked at the woman who had just dismantled her own case, and then at the empty air, and then for a long moment at the door at the back of the room, where through a small pane of glass, a little girl in a blue dress was standing on her toes to watch her father. "Ms. Hollis," he said finally, and his dry voice had changed, gone quieter. "In 22 years, I have very rarely watched a parent walk into my courtroom, prepared to win and choose in front of everyone to tell the truth instead. It is the single most credible thing I have heard all morning. And it does you more honor than any argument your counsel could have made." He paused. "It also makes my job considerably harder, not easier, because now I have two parents I'm inclined to believe and only one child to place." He put his glasses back on and turned. "Mr. Carter, stand up, please. Leave any theater at the door. I've had my fill of speeches from the professionals. I want to ask you some questions myself, and I want plain answers. Do you understand me?" "Yes, Your Honor." Ethan stood. "You sold your vehicle to buy the ticket to be here today?" "Yes, sir." "Why not borrow the money?" "I've borrowed from everyone I know already, Your Honor. For 10 months. For the lawyer, for the flights, for all of it. There was no one left to ask. The truck was the last thing I had worth anything, so I sold it." A pause. "I'll figure out how to get to work without it. That's next week's problem. This week the only thing that mattered was getting here. And I'm told a wealthy passenger offered you $5,000 to give up your seat and fly in the back instead. You refused." "Yes, sir." "You needed money. You've just told me you'd exhausted everyone you could borrow from. $5,000 would have helped you enormously. Why refuse it?" "Because there was no guarantee I'd make the flight if I gave up the seat," Ethan said. "Standby bumping any of it could have made me miss today. And no amount of money is worth missing today. $5,000 does me no good if I'm standing in an airport in New York while a court in London decides whether I ever get to raise my daughter." He looked up steady. "The money was never the point, Your Honor. Being here was the point. It's been the only point for 10 months. Something flickered in the old judge's eyes. "And the fault on the aircraft," Hartley said. "The leak. You'd already been threatened with removal, humiliated by your own account in front of a full cabin. The safest thing for your own purposes would have been to say nothing. Let the crew work and reach London on time. Precisely, in fact, as Mr. Fenwick says a reliable man ought to be. Instead, you forced a delay you must have known could ground the aircraft and cost you this hearing. You risked losing your daughter to save people you will never meet again." He tilted his head. "Explain that to me, Mr. Carter. Plainly. Because it is the one thing in this entire affair I cannot make fit." The courtroom was silent. Even Fenwick was still. And Ethan Carter took a breath and answered with the only thing he had, which was the truth. "Your Honor, I'm going to tell you something I've never said to a judge, because you're asking me straight, so I'll answer you straight. Please. When I saw that leak, there was about 1 second, maybe less, where I thought exactly what you just said. Say nothing. Keep your head down. Get to London. Get to Lily." His voice was low and rough. "For 1 second, I did the math, and the math said the smart move, the move that gets me to my daughter, was to shut my mouth and let that airplane take off." He shook his head slowly. "And then I thought about Lily. I thought about the kind of man I've spent 7 years trying to be in front of her. Because here's the thing about being somebody's dad. Your Honor, you don't get to teach them with speeches. They don't listen to the speeches. They watch what you do. They watch who you are when you think it's going to cost you something." He swallowed. "And I thought if I sit here and say nothing and I get to London and I win, and I raise my daughter, I'll have taught her that, when doing the right thing costs you something you love, you look the other way. I'll have gotten her by becoming a man I wouldn't want her to grow up like. And what's the point of winning her if I have to become someone unworthy of her to do it? He looked at the door at the small face in the glass. So I stood up. And I figured if it cost me the hearing, then somehow I'd find another way to get to her, because that's what I do, I find a way. But I was not going to let a plane full of people die so I could reach my daughter with clean, convenient hands. She wouldn't want that, Dad. I wouldn't want to be that dad. His voice finally cracked at the very end. That's the answer, Your Honor. That's the whole answer. I did it because she's always watching, even from 4,000 miles away. She's always watching, and I will not let her see me become small. The courtroom did not make a sound. Judge Aldous Hartley sat back in his chair, and for a long moment, he simply looked at the man in the worn gray jacket, and the hardness that had lived in that old face for 22 years seemed very slightly to loosen. And then Fenwick stood up. Your Honor, if I may. His voice had lost none of its smoothness, but there was an edge under it now, the edge of a man whose case has been pulled out from under him and who has one card left to play. I'm mindful my client has spoken from the heart, and I respect it. But my duty is to the court's rigor, not its sentiment. And I must observe that everything we have heard this morning, the sold truck, the refused money, the heroism at 30,000 feet, and now this very moving speech about a watching child is unverified. It is Mr. Carter's account of Mr. Carter. A skilled man under pressure can construct a very compelling narrative of his own virtue. I'd simply ask the court not to hand a child's future to a story however well told, without a shred of independent proof that any of it happened the way this man claims. And Ethan felt it the trap Sarah had warned him about in the corridor. He's going to call it a performance. He's going to say, you made it all up. Don't react. He didn't react. He sat perfectly still. But Sarah rose. Your Honor, she said, and her voice was calm, almost gentle. My learned friend asks for proof. Independent proof. Not Mr. Carter's word about Mr. Carter, but evidence from others that these events occurred as described. She paused. I'd like to give him exactly that, with the court's permission. Hartley's eyes narrowed slightly. You have such evidence. I have been holding it in reserve, Your Honor, out of respect for this court, because I did not wish to bury you in it, and I trusted you to reach your own conclusions from the single document I first handed up. A small, precise nod. But my friend has now put the truth of these events directly in issue. He has told this court that Mr. Carter's account may be a fabrication. So it is no longer a question of sentiment. It is a question of fact, and I can prove the facts. She turned to the clerk. There is a video, 30 seconds, filmed by another passenger time-stamped last night at the departure gate. Fenwick's composure flickered. Your Honor, I'd object to. You put his honesty in issue, Mr. Fenwick, Hartley said, and there was iron in it now. You cannot call a man a liar and then object when his counsel offers to prove he told the truth. You've opened the door. Ms. Whitmore, play it. The courtroom went quiet, and a screen on the wall came to life, and their grainy vertical shot over the shoulders of other passengers was Ethan Carter, standing in the aisle of an aircraft. The sound was tinny but clear. There's a hydraulic leak on the number 1 engine pylon, right side of the housing. You cannot fly this airplane. And then a voice off-camera sneering. Now he's an aircraft engineer. And then Ethan again, not shouting, not pleading, just steady and certain and immovable. I spent 11 years as a hydraulic maintenance tech. Do the inspection first. If I'm wrong, you've lost 5 minutes. If I'm right and you push back anyway, you know how this ends. The clip ended. The courtroom was absolutely silent. Sarah let it sit for exactly as long as it needed to. That is what Mr. Carter was doing at 7 o'clock this morning. Your Honor, in the hours before, he could not be in your courtroom, she said quietly. He had already been ordered to give up his seat to a wealthy passenger. He had been threatened with removal. He had begged the crew, telling them he had a custody hearing for his daughter and could not be delayed. And when the moment came that he had to choose between protecting his own chance to be here by staying quiet, by being the compliant passenger who arrives on time and speaking up to save every life on that aircraft. He chose to speak up. He chose 241 strangers over his own certainty of reaching this room. She turned and looked at Fenwick. "My learned friend asked for independent proof. I have here the sworn statements of the aircraft's purser, of its captain, and of a passenger named Daniel Osei, a family solicitor who practices in these very courts, and who happened to be seated in 14C. A small pause. I did not lead with them. I held them back because I did not wish to overwhelm this court with volume. But my friend has demanded independent corroboration, and so I will hand up as much of it as the court cares to read. Every one of these people has sworn unprompted in the middle of their night that Ethan Carter is alive, making reason they are alive this morning. That is not a man's account of himself, Your Honor. That is 241 people's account of him." She set a modest stack on the clerk's desk, not the flood, a considered dozen. "That is who this father is when no one is watching, and everything is on the line. And I would respectfully suggest that this court has just been shown, on time-stamped video, exactly the kind of father this little girl would be growing up with. One who does the right thing when it costs him. One who does not abandon what's in front of him. One who above all shows up." She sat down, and Fenwick, to his credit, did not rise again. He looked at the stack of statements and at the dark screen, and he leaned over and said something very quietly to Rebecca, and Rebecca shook her head, and Fenwick sat back and did not say another word for the rest of the hearing, because there was nothing left to say. The door he'd opened had swallowed him whole. Judge Hartley was quiet for a long, long moment. Then he spoke, and the dryness was still there, but underneath it now was something almost gentle. "I'm going to tell you all what I think," he said, "and then I'm going to make my order, and then we are all going to go home, because there is a child who has been carried across an ocean and cried herself out in a courthouse chair, and frankly, she's had a longer morning than any of us." A few people in the room almost laughed, the tension breaking a fraction. Mr. Fenwick made an argument about patterns, and he was right to. Patterns are what matter, so let us look at the actual pattern. Now the theater on both sides is cleared away. He counted on his fingers. Over 10 months, this father crossed an ocean 4 times at ruinous personal cost to see a child, a court order placed beyond his easy reach. Last night, given a chance to reach her with money in his pocket and a clear conscience, he instead risked missing this very hearing to save the lives of strangers, not because anyone would ever know, but because his daughter would. And this morning, the mother of that child, holding every advantage, chose honesty over victory and dropped her own case rather than win it with a lie. He removed his glasses. That is the pattern. That is a family which, whatever its considerable difficulties, is full of people who, when it truly matters, do the right and difficult thing. I have seen a great many worse patterns than that. I have, I'm sorry to say, rarely seen a better one. He looked at Ethan. "Mr. Carter, I told Miss Whitmore this morning that if you were the man that maintenance log suggested, you'd be standing in my courtroom by 9, and if you were the man I've too often seen, you would not." A pause. "You're standing in my courtroom. And more than that, you answered every question I put to you without a single speech, with nothing but the plain truth, some of which did you no favors, and all of which you told me anyway." He nodded slowly. "I believe you. After 22 years of professional suspicion, God help me, I believe you completely." Ethan's legs almost went out from under him. "Here is my order," Hartley said, and the room went perfectly still. Ethan reached for the edge of the table. "I am not going to award sole custody to either parent. I don't believe it's what this child needs, and having heard her mother this morning, I don't believe it's what either of you truly wants when you're being honest." He looked between them. "Ms. Hollis has built a life here in London. The child is settled in school. She's thriving. And that is to your credit. Ms. Hollis and I will not tear it up on a whim." He turned to Ethan, and Ethan's heart plummeted, and then Hartley kept going. "But this child needs her father fully and reliably, and she needs a great deal more of him than 4 rushed visits a year across an ocean. So this is what will happen. He laid it out plain and precise. Shared parental responsibility jointly both of you in law. The child's primary home during term time remains with her mother in London because stability in her schooling matters, and it exists here. But Mr. Carter is to have generous, defined, and protected contact that no one gets to cut short at 4 minutes on a whim. Ms. Hollis, I heard that part, and it is going into the order in ink. All school holidays, Christmas, Easter, and the entire summer, the child is with her father without exception. Video contact twice weekly at set times uninterrupted. He fixed Rebecca with a look. And should Mr. Carter's circumstances change such that he can live nearer his daughter, this court will look extremely favorably on an application to expand these arrangements. I want both of you within reach of this child as she grows. Do I make myself clear? Yes, Your Honor, Rebecca said quietly. Yes, Your Honor, Ethan managed. One more thing. Hartley leaned forward, looking only at Ethan now. You told me a father teaches his child not with speeches, but with what he does when it costs him something. In 22 years, I don't think I've heard it put better, and I've heard a great many people try. He paused. Your daughter is going to grow up knowing that her father crossed an ocean for her and risked everything to save 241 lives on the way, and then stood in a courtroom and told a judge the whole unvarnished truth when a lie would have served him better. That is a considerable inheritance. It is worth more than any suit, and more than any amount of money, and more than the seat on that aircraft that started all of this. He picked up his pen. This court is adjourned. Go home, all of you. And Mr. Carter. The faintest ghost of a smile crossed the old man's face. Welcome to London. Do try to arrive on time next visit. The gavel came down. Ethan didn't remember crossing the room. One moment he was gripping the edge of the table, and the next he was through the courtroom doors and into the corridor, and Lily was already running because she'd seen his face through the glass, and she'd known children always know, and she hit him at full speed. And he caught her and lifted her clean off the ground and held her so tight he could feel her heartbeat against his own. Is it done? She asked into his neck. Is the boring grown-up stuff done? It's done, baby. Do I get to see you now, like for real? Not just on the phone. And Ethan Carter, standing in a courthouse corridor 4,000 miles from home, with his voice finally completely breaking, said the truest words he had ever spoken. Every holiday, baby. The whole summer. Twice a week on the screen, and every holiday for real, and nobody. Nobody gets to cut it short ever again. A judge just said so. It's a rule now. It's the law. Daddy's coming, and Daddy's going to keep coming for the rest of your whole life. Promise, she whispered. I promise. And you know what your daddy does with promises. She pulled back and looked at him, and the gap in her front teeth showed. When she smiled the smile that had carried him across an ocean through the fog, past every man who told him to know his place. You keep them, she said. You always keep them. That's right, baby, that's right. And a few feet away, Rebecca stood watching them, and she was crying. But it was a different kind of crying than the courtroom. And when Ethan looked up and met her eyes over their daughter's shoulder, she didn't look away. She mouthed 2 words, thank you. And Ethan understood that whatever the two of them had been through, they were going to be able to raise this little girl as 2 people who loved her, and that was worth more than winning. Outside in the tall, echoing hall near the courthouse doors, Marcus Rothwell was waiting. He'd slipped out before the order came down. Some part of him unwilling to sit in that room for the verdict, a man who'd lost his own daughter, unable to watch another man learn whether he'd keep his, and when Ethan came through with Lily on his hip, and Sarah beside him, the billionaire read the answer off his face before a single word was said. You won, Rothwell said. We won? Ethan said. Shared but real. Every holiday, every summer, twice a week on video, all of it written in ink so nobody can take it back. His voice was hoarse. Marcus, there aren't words. There's no way to say what you don't. Rothwell's voice was gruff. Don't you dare thank me. You saved my life last night and 240 other people's, and all I did was spend money, the one thing I've ever been any good at on the first thing in 30 years, that was actually worth spending it on. He looked at Lily, who was studying him with the frank curiosity of a child. Hello, he said, and his gruff voice went soft in a way Ethan hadn't heard from him. "You must be Lily. Your dad talked about you the entire way across the ocean. Wouldn't shut up about you. Not for 1 minute." Lily buried her face shyly in Ethan's shoulder, then peeked back out. "Are you Daddy's friend?" Rothwell was quiet for a second. "You know," he said, "I believe I am. I didn't start out that way. But somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean, yes, I became your daddy's friend." He looked at Ethan, and there was something unfinished in his face, something Ethan recognized instantly. "You made me a promise too," Ethan said quietly. "On the plane. Remember?" Rothwell went still. "Emily," Ethan said, "you said you'd call her. A call, not a text. The whole truth, all of it. That was the price of the plane, Marcus. That was the deal." For a long moment, the billionaire didn't move. "She's 34, he said. "It's 4 in the morning in New York. She probably won't even call her Marcus." Ethan's voice was gentle, but it didn't bend. "You just watched me get my daughter back after 10 months of everyone telling me it was impossible. You told me on that plane, it's not too late until one of you is dead. You were right. So call your daughter. And if she doesn't answer, you call again tomorrow. And the day after. Because that's what we do now, you and me. We show up. We keep showing up. That's the whole deal." Marcus Rothwell looked at Ethan Carter for a long, long moment, the man in the worn gray jacket he'd tried to have dragged off an airplane. The nobody he'd been so certain didn't belong. The father who'd turned out to be carrying the one thing all of Rothwell's money had never been able to buy. And then the fourth richest man in the country walked a few steps down the marble hall and lifted the phone to his ear. And his hand, the hand that had signed deals that moved markets, was trembling. "Emily!" His voice came out young and frightened and hopeful all at once. "Emily, sweetheart, it's your dad. Please don't hang up. I know it's the middle of the night. I've been a coward for 20 years and I'm done being a coward. Can I please just talk to you? Please." And whatever Emily said on the other end, Rothwell's face crumpled and he turned away and his shoulders began to shake, and Ethan Carter stood in that echoing hall holding his daughter and watched a billionaire begin at 4 in the morning to win back the one thing he'd thought was lost forever. Lily tugged at his collar. "Daddy, why is your friend crying?" Ethan pressed his lips to his daughter's hair and held her close and watched the morning light come through the tall windows on the first day of the rest of their life together. "Because he just remembered something important, baby," Ethan said softly. "He remembered that it's never too late to come get the person you love, no matter how far away they are, no matter how long it's been." He closed his eyes. "You just have to be willing to cross the ocean." He thought about all of it. Then the seat he'd refused the man who'd told him to know his place, the leak weeping down white metal, the money he'd turned down the truck he'd sold the fog over London, the mother who'd chosen truth over winning the old judge who'd chosen to believe. And he understood that every single piece of it had turned on one thing, one small stubborn thing that no one could buy, and no one could take a tired man in worn-out boots deciding over and over, no matter what it cost him, to do the right thing and to keep showing up. Because in the end, that was the whole truth of it. The truth they'd tried to throw off an airplane, the truth a billionaire couldn't buy and a barrister couldn't break, and 10 months of doubt couldn't kill. A man's worth was never in his clothes or his job or the money in his pocket or the seat he could afford. It was in whether he showed up for the people who needed him again and again, no matter what it cost, no matter who told him to know his place. Ethan Carter had shown up. He had crossed an ocean to keep a promise to a 7-year-old girl, and he would go on crossing it for the rest of his life for as long as she needed him to. And that not the money, not the medals, not the applause of a saved airplane, that and nothing else is what makes a father. That and nothing else is what makes a man.